A quick what, who, why, where, how, and when of microdosing magic mushrooms by Kyle Woodruff. Read for you by Dallin Bradford. Introduction. The use of psychedelics is gaining in popularity. The 2024 National Survey on Drug Use and Health estimated that in the U.S. alone, 10.4 million people used hallucinogens, up from 7.6 million in 2021. The Global Drug Survey from 2021 reported that 1 in 4 psychedelic users reported microdosing. If you're considering becoming part of those numbers in future surveys, I congratulate you on taking the first step toward exploring whether microdosing is right for you. Learning as much as you can about how to approach a subject is a wise choice that can spare you from less than ideal experiences. First, let's make it abundantly clear. Microdosing is vastly understudied when it comes to modern Western standards of clinical trials, so there are limited scientific resources available on taking smaller doses of psilocybin. Research shows that lasting changes are brought on by high doses of psychedelics, but even there, our knowledge is still evolving on what exactly is happening neurochemically and why they elicit change. At this point, scientifically speaking, we're not entirely sure what occurs at lower doses. Take, for example, a critique of the current state of microdosing research that reviewed 15 papers published before March 2022. The authors said that the majority of published work on microdosing is at a preliminary stage, meaning that many of the conclusions should be taken as exploratory. They pointed to biased and lacking sampling strategies, ad hoc measures and interventions, and the difficulty of accurately identifying the amount of psilocybin in doses of mushrooms as reasons for deeming the studies unreliable. Because of that, critics claim that consuming sub-perceptible doses of psychedelics merely causes a placebo effect. But then consider a systematic review that summarized 44 empirical microdosing studies performed between 1955 and 2021, including a set of infrequently cited studies that took place prior to their prohibition, that found these claims that microdosing effects are largely due to expectancy are premature and possibly incorrect. So, unsurprisingly, we have support on both sides of the argument. Regarding the critique of 15 papers above, I would just like to point out that while the authors appreciate that running a trial using a scheduled substance such as psilocybin or LSD is no small feat, rather than investing time into running a study they felt was up to their standards, they preferred merely to dedicate time to criticizing and nitpicking the work of others. They chalk it up to things like, it may be that young disciplines in which scientists are attracted to a publishing gold rush, as is the case with the microdosing discipline, are particularly vulnerable to these practices. While I feel employing this bucket of crabs mentality without actually contributing something worthwhile to the scientific literature doesn't exactly help advance our knowledge around microdosing, I thought it was at least fair to put this perspective into the book to paint a full picture of beliefs around the subject matter. Regardless, something is driving this rise in popularity, so any gaps in information that exist today are supplemented with hypothetical conclusions drawn from studies using larger doses of psilocybin, surveys from microdosers around the world, anecdotal individual reports, and historical use cases from indigenous tribes. There is no way around this. This is all the information we have due to the current legal limitations imposed by the governments of the United States and other countries. All that said, the amount of anecdotal evidence available in this field of study is vast and growing, and a number of reasonable conclusions can be inferred. The aim of this book is to provide you with just the right amount of information to feel comfortable beginning your journey without feeling overwhelmed. 10 years ago, there wasn't enough information out there. Today, there is an intimidating amount to sort through. This guide should be a quick read that cuts the fluff and gets straight to the core of what's necessary to build a solid practice, regardless of whether potential benefits come from actual psychedelic intervention or the placebo effect. Also, keep in mind that the information in this book may not be all-encompassing, as new insights and information continue to pour into the collective database from all over the world every day. This is an evolving field, and some of the information may soon be proven to be partially or fully incorrect. It's best to confirm anything you find with other sources before exploring microdosing yourself or recommending it to others. And while this book contains tips for success drawn from personal experience or collective wisdom from others to shorten your learning curve, please note that the information provided is for educational purposes only and is not medical or legal advice. Readers should consult medical or legal professionals before engaging in any course of microdosing. There, now that the disclaimers are out of the way, let's dive in. What is in mushrooms that makes them so magical? There is a naturally occurring compound found in certain types of mushrooms that causes changes in perception, mood, and thinking, and can even bring on visual and auditory distortions and hallucinations. The most popular species of magic mushrooms you'll likely come across are psilocybin mushrooms, named for their compound psilocybin, which by itself is not very psychoactive at all. Only once it's consumed and converted to psilocin by the liver, delivered through the bloodstream to the brain, do things start to get psychedelic. So, what is microdosing? A microdose can be thought of as a very small amount of a drug used to test or benefit from its physiological action while minimizing undesirable side effects. The general consensus on a definition for microdosing in this context seems to be something like the practice of consuming a subhallucinogenic amount of a psychedelic substance with the intention of improving one's quality of life. Subhallucinogenic is the key term here, while macrodosing psychedelics, or crossing a dosage threshold that achieves the more profound effects mentioned above, aims to create the more mystical experiences that probably come to mind when you hear the word psychedelics. Microdosing isn't intended to induce that kind of experience at all. It's more intended to facilitate incremental changes over longer periods of time. When taking a correctly sized microdose, you won't feel any sort of disorientation, intoxication, or substantial changes to your consciousness whatsoever. Although subtle, the effects are noticeable, but not so much so that they will impair your normal functioning. You won't approach any immediate therapeutic breakthrough or spiritual transcendence by any means, but that's not the point here. While microdosing, people go about their normal daily activities, work, leisure, fitness, time with family or friends. However, they often report going about these things with greater enjoyment, clarity, and ease. You may have more energy, colors may appear brighter, and you may notice a better ability to focus, but that's about as far as it goes. Measuring the lasting effects of this approach is better done by taking a step back and examining progress over bigger snapshots on the calendar. Are there any downsides to microdosing? In an infomercial-like fashion, I'd like you to breeze through this list of possible side effects and try not to be alarmed. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, bloating, severe bleeding from the rectum, hemorrhages, internal bleeding, loss of balance, unusual hair growth on the tongue, eyes, or fingertips, stroke, heart attack, catastrophic failure of the heart, brain, liver, or kidneys, coma, seizures, thoughts of suicide, sudden psychosis, spontaneous combustion, or death. None of these apply. Well, actually, maybe some nausea. Mushrooms can do that from time to time, but when taking the dosages we're talking about here, that's typically minimal. In all seriousness, assuming you're a relatively healthy individual, the risks of microdosing seem to be pretty much non-existent based on the evidence we have. Although in the eyes of orthodox science, the safety of microdosing is not yet settled, as we don't have the abundance of randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies that science would like in order for us to claim so. There are a few rare circumstances where microdosing should possibly be avoided, which we'll get into later, but for most people, psychedelic mushrooms have been consumed safely by innumerable individuals all over the world for thousands of years. And throughout the years of more recent research, there has been no evidence showing long-term neurotoxic effects resulting from the use of psilocybin. Even at high doses, psilocybin is one of the safest compounds we know of when compared to the hospitalization rates of substances like alcohol, coffee, aspirin, antidepressants, and cannabis. The three biggest known risks associated with microdosing are 1. making sure you've got a pure source of what you intend to take in the first place, 2, taking too much of your intended substance by accident, and 3, potential interactions with any other medications you're taking, all of which we'll cover in this book. But if you've got a reputable source and understand what's involved in taking intentional dosages, you more than likely won't find yourself in any bad situations. Some people report things like anxiety, irritability, headache, or sleep disturbances, but these are fleeting effects that are often due to taking too much of the substance and would only last a maximum of 4 to 6 hours, the time it takes for the substance to be completely processed from your system. Undesirable effects can usually be mitigated with a reduced dose on the next occasion, and if they continue popping up, you can simply stop microdosing. Most of the time, though, microdosing has a pretty good track record. What's the quick history behind microdosing? While microdosing is a hot topic as of late, the concept is nothing new. We know for sure that various indigenous groups have been utilizing various doses of psychoactive plants for thousands of years in some cases. Beyond that, Terence McKenna went as far as to attribute the massive leap in evolutionary brain size to the foraging of psilocybin mushrooms with his stoned ape theory, a controversial hypothesis that changing landscapes in Africa steered early foraging hominids toward psilocybin mushrooms growing out of emerging ungulate populations, and the psychoactive effects were an evolutionary catalyst that led to increased visual acuity for hunting, stimulated libido for higher rates of reproduction, and greater social bonding and language-forming capabilities. Our first modern understanding of microdosing psychedelics, though, can probably be traced back to a 1976 interview from High Times with Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist who was the first to synthesize, ingest, and learn about the psychedelic effects of LSD, who said, "Very small doses, perhaps 25 micrograms, could be useful as a euphoriant or antidepressant." He famously utilized the practice in the last few decades of his life, until he died at 102. The term itself, however, seems to have been coined by someone by the name of David Rose, going by the handle of JDYF333 on X, Flickr, and Blogspot, who has posted, "I invented the word microdose in 1980 when I had access to accurately measured doses of pure LSD, providing photos of labels for his Clearlight brand Mind Vitamin tablets." The one who is likely most responsible for spreading the popularity of the word microdose, however, can surely be attributed to James Fadiman, Ph.D., an early psychedelic researcher now considered the father of modern microdosing. His 2011 book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, had an entire chapter dedicated to the practice. He's created surveys and collected anecdotal use cases from all over the world, putting together much of what we know about microdosing today. Fadiman's work was given a boost in audience in March of 2015 when he appeared on The Tim Ferriss Show, broadcasting the idea to a broad audience that was already tuning in for business, fitness, and biohacking knowledge. This introduction into the world of influential people, venture capitalists, and tech entrepreneurs got the trend rolling toward the popularity of microdosing that we see today. In 2017, Ayelet Waldemann's book, A Really Good Day: How Microdosing Made a Mega Difference in My Mood, My Marriage, and My Life, pushed the topic to an even broader audience by reframing microdosing as not just some Silicon Valley performance-enhancing trend, but rather a therapeutic application for middle-class wives and mothers. This take encouraged many mainstream media outlets to portray the practice in a more sympathetic light, discussing the safety of psychedelics and questioning their legal status openly. The COVID-19 pandemic marked another turning point for psychedelics, as an increase in mental health issues skyrocketed. There was already media buzz around microdosing being a cost-effective intervention for anxiety, loneliness, and depression floating around the internet, and several organizations selling products like grow kits or microdosing capsules, as well as others offering support and coaching, cropped up during this time. An increased focus on decriminalization throughout cities and states in America, as well as in other countries, unfolded accordingly. Does microdosing have any addictive properties? A substance is addictive when you need more and more of it to get the same effect, and if you stop, it has negative physical consequences. Psychedelics in general are anti-addictive in that if you dose too often, you develop partial or full tolerance. You'll no longer feel the effects, and taking more will make no difference. People who microdose typically do so for a fixed period of time and then take time off with no negative effects whatsoever. What else should someone know about microdosing? Well, when I mentioned the 3 biggest risks for microdosing earlier? I kinda lied. The biggest risk of microdosing is actually the legal status of psilocybin mushrooms. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, psychedelics are still currently labeled as drugs with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, categorized as the most dangerous drugs of all, with potentially severe psychological or physical dependence, and considered a Schedule I drug at the federal level in the United States. I don't say this to scare you. I just want to make sure you're aware. You should always consider the legal implications of what you're pursuing. That said, psychedelics have certainly come a long way in terms of becoming far less taboo than they were when I started using them 10 or so years ago. Exciting research has resumed since the hysterical reaction of the war on drugs in the 70s, before which the study of psychedelics was taken seriously by the field of psychology. Research began in the 50s, extended into the 60s, and even continued in hiding throughout the years until recently, when it resurfaced once more in universities like Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, and elsewhere. Even with these legal improvements, though, it's probably a good idea to be cautious about who you trust your information with. While government agencies are becoming less interested in cracking down on personal psychedelic use, it might be in your best interest to take precautionary measures to protect yourself until it's fully approved. Decide whether or not the fear of getting caught is greater than the benefits of engaging with these substances, but at the same time, consider maintaining some privacy to fly under the radar if you do. Plus, it's wise for me to mention that I would never, in writing, encourage the utilization of substances where they're unlawful. However, I can simultaneously acknowledge that illicit self-medication happens from time to time, and feel that access to a helpful guide is imperative for individual harm reduction as well as public safety. So here we are. And now that you at least know what microdosing is and a bit about the potential risks, shall we carry on? Who is doing all these illegal drugs? A bunch of drugged-out hippies from the 70s? Yes. But also Silicon Valley CEOs, allegedly. Among others, allegedly. Microdose.me, proclaimed on their website as the world's largest microdosing study, published a naturalistic observational study of 953 microdosers from 84 countries. Their breakdown of the participants, with the inclusion criteria of being 18 years of age or older, able to read in English, and having access to an iOS device to download their app, showed the following. Ethnicity: white, 85.7%, Latinx, 7.8%, Asian, 2.6%, Black, 2%. Age: 25 to 54, 79%, 55 plus, 11%, 18 to 24, 10%. Sexual orientation: heterosexual, 88%, LGBTQ2S+, 12%. Gender: male, 70%, female, 29%, other, 1%. Employment: full-time, 59%, other, 20%, part-time, 14%, student, 7%. Income: $30,000 to $89,999, 45%, $90,000 plus dollars, 35%, $10,000 to $29,999, 16%, less than $10,000, 4%. Education. Post-secondary, 59%. Secondary, 21%. Graduate degree, 19%. Less than secondary education, 1%. Community setting. Urban, 41%. Suburban, 41%. Rural, 18%. The narrative that only dropouts and war-opposing hippies abuse these dangerous hallucinogens is a paradigm of the past. It's challenging to get a feel for exactly how many people are microdosing, as there is still, understandably, a lot of hesitation to openly discuss the topic with the current laws in place. But if it's any marker, there are countless reports being mentioned on platforms like Reddit, which has 285,000 plus people from all walks of life chiming in on the topic of r/microdosing. And if it's any testament to how mainstream the topic of psychedelics has become, nearly every major media platform has even embraced coverage in recent years, as can be found in articles like these. Believers say microdosing psychedelics helps them. Scientists are trying to measure the claims. Associated Press, April 2025. After 20 years in the finance industry, I felt depressed and anxious until I started microdosing. Business Insider, September 2024. This is literally your brain on drugs. The New York Times, July 2024. Americans have demonized drugs for decades. Now we're doing them every day. The Guardian, May 2024. Microdosing is more popular than ever. Here's what you need to know. USA Today, February 2024. The working woman's newest life hack. Magic mushrooms. The Wall Street Journal, February 2024. Microdosing mushrooms. What does science say about it? The Washington Post, June 2023. A new chapter in the science of psychedelic microdosing. The Atlantic, March 2019. Many cultural figures have also come out publicly as endorsing psychedelics, both long ago and more recently. Actors like Kristen Bell said she's in a better place with her depression and anxiety after a psilocybin trip. Susan Sarandon has discussed profound experiences on mushrooms, LSD, and ayahuasca to reframe things and remind you of your place in the universe. Carrie Fisher had positive experiences with LSD for dealing with bipolar disorder and addiction. Athletes like Mike Tyson have spoken about full doses of psychedelics, but also said he takes regular small amounts to manage mental clarity and enhance physical training. Aaron Rodgers has shared about ayahuasca experiences for improving mental health. Phil Jackson talked about how LSD boosted his coaching abilities in his book, Maverick, More Than a Game. Musicians like Sting have talked about his immensely rewarding psychedelic experiences. Post Malone has talked about regularly microdosing as well as creating music sets on mushrooms. Miley Cyrus has revealed her ayahuasca use for its healing properties. Comedians like Chelsea Handler have said microdosing mushrooms is a game changer. Seth Rogen has spoken about the introspective and creative effects of microdosing. George Carlin talked about LSD being a profound turning point in his book, Last Words. Writers like Aldous Huxley described an experience in detail in The Doors of Perception. Deepak Chopra said LSD influenced the whole trajectory of his life. Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind contributed to much of the momentum in the media, interviewed by the likes of Oprah Winfrey. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre expressed the long-term benefits of his experience with mescaline. Alan Watts discusses psychedelic use in writings such as The New Alchemy. Sam Harris has openly talked about his perspective shifts with psychedelics. Scientists like Francis Crick's regular LSD use may have influenced his discovery of the double helix structure of DNA. John C. Lilly discusses regular use of LSD, often in the float tank he invented, in his book, Center of the Cyclone. Andrew Huberman has discussed using MDMA therapy for his own mental health. Tech folks like Steve Jobs declared that LSD is one of the most important things he ever did. Elon Musk has talked about ketamine use for depression. Sam Altman claims his psychedelic experiences were transformative and life-changing. Politicians or royalty, like Prince Harry, said psychedelics helped him heal from the trauma of losing his mother. Dan Creshaw pushed to have a psychedelic research provision signed into law in 2023. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a longtime advocate of psychedelics for therapeutic use. Podcast hosts like Aubrey Marcus have focused on psychedelics with many of his guest interviews for years. Tim Ferriss is responsible for some of the microdosing momentum in the media, speaking about psychedelics in numerous podcasts, videos, and writings. Joe Rogan has perhaps had one of the biggest influences in turning the psychedelic narrative mainstream, talking on his #1 podcast with an enormous reach for years. Is there anyone who shouldn't be microdosing? Microdosing isn't for everyone. Your experience could be wildly different from someone else's, and there's no way of knowing how it will go until you try it. But there are a few categories of people that I do want to address here. First, I mentioned Ayelet Waldman above, a wife and mother. The natural question here might be, can taking psychedelics as a parent be considered irresponsible? I attended a talk called Psychedelic Fatherhood, Transforming Families One Dad at a Time at the 2025 Psychedelic Science Conference. A panel of 4 men shared stories and answered questions about how psychedelics have impacted their parenting skills for nearly an hour. I won't admit that I got choked up on more than one occasion, but some of the tales about improving their connection with their children were touching, to say the least. My takeaway from this panel was that if done responsibly, psychedelics can make you a better person in general, which will only translate positively to parenthood. In her book, Ayelet talks about microdosing as likely saving her marriage. The U.S. has the highest rate of children living in single-parent homes in the world. Children from single-parent homes are twice as likely to suffer from mental health and behavioral problems, and perform worse in school than those living with married parents. There are a slew of other increased rates of negative consequences for children coming from single-parent homes, like youth suicide, teenage pregnancy, propensity for violence and sexual assault, becoming imprisoned, failed relationships of their own, and more. If microdosing has the potential to save relationships and keep homes with children intact, it seems more responsible than irresponsible if someone thinks it might help their situation. If you are already a single parent, perhaps microdosing can help there too. In an article called Motherhood on Mushrooms, Microdosing Psilocybin Helped Me Cope with Parenting Stress, Jill DiDonato found herself raising a young daughter alone in Los Angeles during the COVID-19 pandemic. New to the area, limited by social distancing and shutdowns, not to mention paranoid about catching the virus, the already stressful reality of raising a child on her own became worse. Things changed when she was introduced to microdosing psilocybin by a new friend. Even in times of distress, she said, it made me feel more connected to the universe, and it ignited a sense of magic, hope, and purpose all rolled into one, which is, incidentally, what inspired me to become a mom in the first place. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by parenting, she felt lucky that she was able to share the magic of the world with her daughter. It also provided her with the clarity that living alone in LA wasn't best for her child. I credit microdosing with allowing me the freedom to decide what was best for my family, even if it meant giving up dusty palms and a house near the sea. A return to Brooklyn, where I had a deep web of friends and family I could lean on for support, would alleviate many of my parenting anxieties around isolation. If microdosing can provide this sense of calmness and clarity to single parenthood, should anyone really be so quick to call the practice irresponsible? Who else shouldn't be microdosing? What about children? My God, you're probably thinking, you're not about to suggest handing out illicit substances with potentially unknown side effects to the youth, are you? And I used to have the same view. Previously, I had hesitations around what age people should start experimenting with psychedelics, feeling that the brain stops developing in the mid-20s, so maybe that's an appropriate time. If you have a perfectly happy, healthy, and sober teenager, sure, I'd still hesitate to claim it's a good idea to indulge in powerful mind-altering substances before the brain is fully formed, until more evidence is out there. But on the other hand, If, say, someone has stumbled into drugs or alcohol problems early on, and an alternative is watching them suffer through addiction and failing forms of more conservative methods of intervention, could microdosing be an option toward healing? Let me present you with another use case from Reddit that shifted my consideration. My daughter is 13 and currently struggling with depression for over a year now, and recently stepped things up a notch by taking an overdose of paracetamol and ending up in hospital. I know she doesn't want to die, but she is getting to a point where she just can't live like this anymore. The doctors want her on antidepressants for at least a year, and I'm very hesitant about this. Personally, I know shrooms saved my life, and so my thoughts have naturally gone to giving her either a microdose for a few months or a bigger dose one time. As this is all unknown territory with teenagers and depression, I'm hoping someone here has some experience with this, or knows research, helpful articles, so we can make the best and safest decision. Just like to add, we have followed all the medical advice given by doctors. She has therapy, joined a team sport, we have animals, eat healthy, get plenty of sunshine, and have seen a naturopath about gut bacteria health as well. I'm also a very loving, open mother, and am lucky that she feels safe to talk to me about how she is feeling and knows that we can talk about anything. As there is little to no research on teenagers and psychedelics, I'm asking for people who had experiences, bad or good, as a teenager. Hundreds of thousands of teenagers have taken them over the years, and some of you must be here. I didn't start taking drugs properly until my late 20s, and I would advise anyone else to do the same. However, desperate times call for desperate measures. As you can imagine, this controversial topic heated up pretty quickly. Responses like this one filled the forum. The fact that after your daughter's suicide attempt, instead of listening to the mental health professionals helping you, you're getting on fucking social media and asking a bunch of people who like to take Schedule 1 illegal drugs if it's okay to give psychedelic mushrooms to your 13-year-old daughter may make you want to reevaluate the series of decisions you made in your life that have led you to this point. The original poster defended herself in such cases, pointing out that exposure to SSRIs nearly doubles the risk of suicide among adolescents, whereas psilocybin has no such known consequences. Other commenters supported those statements, to which the opposing parties made it abundantly clear that there aren't any clinical studies on psilocybin in youth. Furthermore, Child Protective Services could remove the child from her custody if word got out, which would arguably make things worse. I wasn't even going to broach the topic of microdosing in adolescence for fear of skating on thin ice, but after venturing down this rabbit hole, I decided it was an important cultural conversation that needs to be advanced. I would just like to emphasize, however, that by no means is any of the following medical advice, but rather a presentation of what research churned up. To begin with, the opposing party is right in that no clinical research on psychedelic use in youth is available, as there are perceived ethical obstacles in doing so. However, the original poster offers a rebuttal by alluding to examples of indigenous tribes that have been including youth in ceremonies for generations, with no evidence of negative consequences. In digging for myself, I found that this goes beyond just anecdotal reports. In a study that compared 61 Native American church members who regularly consumed peyote throughout their lifetime, with the average age of 31 years, average years of consumption 21 years, and at least 100 ingestions, to 79 individuals who reported minimal or no use of peyote, alcohol, or other substances, no significant deficits were found on mental and neuropsychological tests. A cytogenetic study on human chromosomes examined 57 Huichol Indians descending from a 1600-year cultural tradition of ingestion of peyote, with a lifelong individual history starting as early as 6 years old, compared to 50 Huichol Indian controls and 10 laboratory controls, and the results indicated that multi-generational ingestion of peyote is not associated with abnormalities in lymphocyte chromosomes. Research in Brazil, conducted among 28 ayahuasca-consuming adolescent members of the União do Vegetal Church and 28 adolescents who never used ayahuasca, showed no differences between peers when compared on a number of qualitative variables, including vignettes measuring moral and ethical concerns. Another study compared 41 adolescents from a Brazilian ayahuasca sect to 43 adolescents who never drank ayahuasca, and despite exposure to a hallucinogenic substance, the adolescents using ayahuasca were mostly comparable to controls, except for a considerably smaller proportion of alcohol use. In yet another study that compared 40 adolescents from a Brazilian ayahuasca sect to 40 controls matched on sex, age, and educational background for psychiatric symptomatology, considerably lower frequencies of positive scoring for anxiety, body dysmorphism, and attentional problems were detected among ayahuasca-using adolescents, despite having overall similar psychopathological profiles displayed by both study groups. In an interview clip called "Should Teens Trip?", Mark Hayden, executive director of MAPS Canada and an expert in substance abuse, argues that the plastic nature of developing brains could actually be advantageous for psychedelics to nip maladaptive habits in the bud and positively shape the future trajectories of youth. The comment section exploded with testimonials such as the following. "Took acid at 16 and at mid-trip it made me realize all the negative things that I do in my life. I've taken acid many times and did it first when I was 15. From the first trip, it helped me become much more considerate of everyone else. I took shrooms when I was 16 and had severe anxiety, but after I understood it in a new way and thought of it as a lesson. I was getting drunk and smoking pot at 14. I'm only 16 now, and I don't care to drink really because I've tripped several times. After I did acid, it brought me out of a deep depression. Tripping since 14 helped me on the right path to walk in life to be a good person. I'm 16, ate about 2 grams of mushrooms 4 months ago. It was my first mushroom trip. I felt like I finally discovered myself, and my severe depression was cleared up. It opened my eyes on a lot. My view on the bad drugs, heavy drinking, it all changed. Truly the best experience I've had in my life." For those still holding out for clinical evidence, while not scientifically defined as a psychedelic and instead classified as a dissociative anesthetic, and not naturally occurring in plants or fungi, but rather synthesized in a lab, ketamine is considered by many in the therapy field to be a psychedelic based on its ability to induce altered states of consciousness, shifts in perception, and profound experiences that can lead to personal insights. It's a Schedule III substance that can be administered as an off-label, not specifically FDA-approved, treatment for mental health conditions like depression and PTSD. A randomized double-blind clinical trial consisting of 17 adolescents, ages 13 to 17, with a diagnosis of major depressive disorder showed that a single ketamine infusion significantly reduced depressive symptoms 24 hours after infusion compared with a control. Another study demonstrated the potential role of ketamine in treating 13 adolescents, aged 14.5 to 18.8, with treatment-resistant depression based on significant decreases in the Children's Depression Rating Scale, revised. Also to be considered is that many teens are inevitably going to experiment with altering consciousness on their own. Results from the 2024 National Survey on Drug Use and Health reported that in the U.S. alone, about 11.1 million people aged 12 to 17 used illicit drugs in the past year, about 405,000 of which used hallucinogens, while about 28 million people aged 18 to 25 used illicit drugs in the past year, about 2.4 million of which used hallucinogens. According to the National Survey Results on Drug Use, 1975 to 2023, overview and detailed results for secondary school students, 12th grade hallucinogen use doubled from 3% in 2019 to 6% in 2023, about half of which initiated use by 10th grade, pointing to the high school years as a peak time of initiation. DARE failed, actually increasing rates of drug use in some cases. The most recently mentioned survey reported that while LSD and other hallucinogens were about equally available in the late 1970s, LSD availability was substantially higher in the 1990s, years when DARE was most prevalent in American culture. This opens the argument that cops bringing a suitcase full of drugs into schools and teaching kids what they look like, how they make you feel, and where to find them, but to just say no once they're in front of you, of course, wasn't the best approach. Likewise, telling kids that marijuana is as dangerous as heroin may have only piqued their interest in trying harder drugs when they found out that was a lie. The focus always should have been on accurate research, proper education, and smoother cultural integration. Yet things remain otherwise. But how young is too young for psychedelics? Well, consider that while the legal drinking age in the U.S. is 21, many states allow minors to consume alcohol with parental consent. The legal drinking age in much of Europe is 18, and similarly, many countries allow the same for kids as young as 14 in countries like Germany. I'm not one to judge, as I've certainly had my fair share of alcohol, especially in my youth. But let's not kid ourselves. Alcohol is poison. It's well known that it affects both developed and developing brains negatively, and rates of alcoholism increase the younger you begin. Yet here it is, not only culturally acceptable but often celebrated, even seen as a rite of passage when teenagers go off to high school or college and stumble through finding a balance between parties and work. Let's also consider that, according to the CDC, millions of children, some as young as 3 years old, are being treated with powerful ADHD medications. These medications are also well known to have negative consequences in developing brains, yet the rates of use are increasing at an alarming rate because our attention spans aren't apparently up to snuff in preschool. Youthful drinking is legally celebrated. Toddlers are pumped full of amphetamines, and yet Reddit is up in arms about a mother inquiring about microdosing sacred plants to save her suicidal teenager. I'm sure it all makes sense in some parallel universe. Looking to various indigenous cultures, the Native American church often invites their youth into the ceremonial teepee as a rite of passage around the age of 12. Some sects of the Bwiti religion in Gabon initiate the Iboga baptism between the ages of 8 and 10. The Huichol Indians of Mexico may begin taking peyote around age 6. Ayahuasca churches such as Santo Daime and Unao do Vegetal in Brazil have also been known to give extremely small doses of ayahuasca to newborn babies as a symbolic initiation into their tradition. Overall, the accusations that giving psychedelics to youth is irresponsible because there is no scientific evidence to support it are hypocritical, as the claims are baseless in that there is no scientific evidence to dispute it either. At best, it's perpetual fear-mongering that stems from the ignorant beliefs instilled into the population by the United States government during the 70s and 80s war on drugs. At worst, it's ego-driven policing by parents who think they know better. There are potentially unknown risk factors, sure, no one can dispute that. But there are anecdotal benefits described from numerous indigenous cultures around the world without any observed side effects, and no one can dispute that either. Again, I am not advocating for the decision to give anyone's children psychedelics without scientific evidence to support safety and efficacy, but I am against people making judgments and criticisms that are baseless. So, what can we definitively conclude from all of this? The Reagan administration escalated the war on drugs and heavily supported the aforementioned DARE program, which further demonized psychedelics based purely on political motivation and further delayed the findings of research on things like psychedelics offering therapeutic effects for Alzheimer's disease, which Reagan ironically suffered from for 10 years before he perished. Arguably, because of this delay, we currently have limited research on whether or not psychedelics can safely be administered to the youth for things like curing depression or addiction. What we do have is evidence of cultures that date back thousands of years, with traditions of giving the youth psychedelic substances because they believe they are an important part of religion, bonding with the community, and rites of passage. What we don't have is cultures banning these substances because of all the negative consequences they witnessed in their youth over several millennia. What we also have is a slew of scattered anecdotal evidence floating around the internet of a vast number of teenagers who have experimented with psychedelics in their youth and have seen benefits from it. What we don't have is an abundance of mental hospitals housing millions of teenagers who have fried their brains, nor an equal number of mothers screaming bloody murder in the streets while pushing for the erection of Reagan statues. Those are the facts, perhaps presented in a manner that spits on the grave of a politician compromised by dementia when he fueled hysteria with false information about your brain on drugs in order to justify an expensive and ineffective war on drugs. But facts nonetheless. My point is that while I wholeheartedly agree that caution is wise in approaching children and any substance, it's important to recognize that the idea of introducing youths to psychedelics being dangerous is a decidedly Western concept, a recent one at that, and one that came about as a result of the slaughter and near genocide of cultures that had far more knowledge of these substances by Western governments. Because that's what Jesus would have wanted, of course. If we can look outside of rigid paradigms, such as Adderall, introduced out of a lab in 1996, being far safer for children than plants and fungi that emerged from the earth and have been consumed by humans since who knows when, we might at least be able to open our minds to the possibility that just because Western science hasn't proven what ancient cultures have been doing for thousands of years is safe, that doesn't mean it isn't. Until there is evidence to the contrary, we shouldn't be using laws that were enacted without scientific backing to threaten mothers at rope's end who are inquiring about natural means of healing after weighing the risks of pushing their child over the edge of suicidality with modern pharmaceutical drugs. You can't blame a woman for turning to Mother Nature over a healthcare industry that's willing to say, "Preschool? Never too early to start with the amphetamines." Now, what about pregnant women? All right, now you've lost it. That's where I draw the line. I was in the same camp, and possibly still am, but at least want to provide you with some intriguing use cases I found. An article titled, "Is it safe to use magic mushrooms while pregnant? One woman's quest raises questions," describes 20-something Michaela's journey of psilocybin use during her pregnancy. Her reason for indulging in the substance prior to getting pregnant was to address the mental health issues that arose after recurrent sexual assaults in her childhood, and to ease the use of alcohol and opiates she indulged in to dull her traumatic memories and flashbacks. Ethical constraints have limited studies on psilocybin use among women during pregnancy, and the gap in research and lingering stigma around psychedelics have left women like Michaela to navigate decisions on their own. Failing to find any information on the internet, she turned to Indigenous Insights. She reached out to an Indigenous woman-led group that was coordinating a psilocybin ceremony nearby, where participants were planning to ingest mushrooms under the guidance of an elder. She asked if they had any opinions on whether participating would be harmful to her pregnancy. The woman leading the group told Michaela that in her tradition, mothers continued consuming plant medicines throughout their pregnancies and into motherhood. Michaela went on to use both micro and macro doses of psilocybin throughout her pregnancy, which she credits with helping her develop a repulsion to alcohol and gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Since then, she's built a website and following with the help of collaborators and sent out surveys aimed to collect stories of women who used any amount of psilocybin while pregnant, making it clear they weren't encouraging anyone to do so, but simply documenting experiences of those who already had. For the sake of brevity, I will point you toward Michaela's website if you're interested in seeing a detailed breakdown of survey results from over 400 mothers who ingested psilocybin before, during, and after pregnancy. https://mothersofthemushroom.com/research/. In a very brief synopsis, though, there were many reports of relief from discomfort, anxiety, and depression throughout all stages of pregnancy and early parenthood, and perhaps most importantly, all reported newborns were healthy at birth, with no significant deviations from population norms in weight, length, or overall condition. That said, the website clearly acknowledges that the observations are preliminary, and that such a small sample size should be interpreted with caution, encouraging readers to consult healthcare providers, saying more extensive research will be crucial to understanding the full implications of using psilocybin during and after pregnancy. One other point the initial article encourages readers to keep in mind is that the survey was issued to a network of regular psychedelic users within Michaela's and her collaborators' audiences, which could skew conclusions. They also point out Michaela's own bias as a vocal proponent of psilocybin, which leads to no surprise that the survey results coming from her audience would be positive as well. While these anecdotal cases may seem encouraging, one study of 15 pregnant rats showed that intravenous injections of psilocin readily crossed their placental barriers. Now, this opens up the internet to make jokes regarding the baby entering the world already enlightened and such, but the authors of this study concluded that because psilocin was eliminated slowly from the fetal tissues of rats, human consumption of magic mushrooms should be avoided during pregnancy. Biased supporters of psychedelics could claim that all this single example proved was that when injected, as opposed to metabolized through the stomach, gut, and tissues, isolated psilocin, not psilocybe mushrooms with all of their other encompassing compounds and nutrients, administered at much larger doses than a microdose, crossed the placental barrier in rats, not humans, showing no correlation of negative or even positive effects. While all of this is true, the fact that this psychoactive substance does have the potential to cross the placental barrier is worth noting. That said, an article from the Microdosing Institute references two indigenous groups, the Shipibo-Canibo group of the Peruvian Amazon and Wixárika, Huichol group in Mexico and the southern U.S., that have a long history of consumption of ayahuasca and peyote, respectively, by pregnant and breastfeeding women, and they argue there are many benefits to both the baby and the mother. One such belief is that during ceremony, the mother provides the fetus with an impactful, multisensory experience, potentially cultivating increased awareness and sensitivity. In a separate article called Beautiful Flowers, Women and Peyote in Indigenous Traditions, Juanita Nelson, a certified professional midwife and director of community midwives in Durango, Colorado, who has been involved with the Native American Church for more than 30 years, says, "Pregnant women who eat peyote have very little problem with miscarriage, and that it helps establish the placenta and maturation of the fetus." Juanita also mentions that women of the church report that eating peyote while nursing increases the amount of milk they have for their children, and references a study that showed mescaline, the active compound in peyote, stimulates the secretion of prolactin, a hormone that promotes the production of breast milk, more than fourfold above baseline levels, up to 7 hours after initial ingestion. I also found an interview published in a paper from the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs with Clarice Andreozzi, a 34-year-old biologist whose bachelor's thesis analyzed the physiology of childbirth. In her church, the Chão de Planalto in Brazil, she said, "Women can take ayahuasca during the whole period of pregnancy and also during labor. It is the woman's own choice. No one forces it on her. As is the case with children, pregnant women take a smaller dose than adults." She adds, "It is common for women members of the church to take ayahuasca during labor. The beverage itself, as well as the prayers, are good for childbirth. They help the woman relax and maintain contractions. I took ayahuasca during all my pregnancies and during childbirth. All of the births were normal, without complications. Ayahuasca gave me a full consciousness about my body and what was happening during such a special moment as childbirth. I was able to relax and experience the births in a very beautiful and positive manner. Despite the normal birthing pains, I felt comfortable and completely certain about what was happening, and felt a deep understanding about the meaning of birth and motherhood. All of the births went really well." When asked how she would react to statements like, "The use of ayahuasca by pregnant women is dangerous. It is thought that it can provoke neurological changes in the fetus. For the same reason, it should not be taken by children," Andreozzi said, "I would ignore these assertions. It is a frivolous claim at the very least, with no scientific support or evidence. Ayahuasca gives women a profound experience of pregnancy and a strong contact with the baby in her womb. And children who take ayahuasca are normal, healthy, and intelligent. At this point, there are many families who have used ayahuasca in the church for several generations, and in general, they are healthy, happy, prosperous, and well-balanced. There was a counter-argument in this same paper where someone said, alcohol, for example, we now know is absolutely contraindicated during pregnancy, even in small quantities, for the risk of fetal alcohol syndrome. Despite this, we have reports of many people who drank alcohol during pregnancy and nothing happened to their children, which doesn't change our knowledge that something could have happened due to alcohol consumption. There's only one small problem with that argument, though. There's a history of increased rates of birth defects observed among pregnant women drinking alcohol, but there's no history of increased rates of birth defects observed among pregnant women drinking ayahuasca. In a lecture called Fertile Grounds, Peyote and the Human Reproductive System, Stacy B. Schaefer, Ph.D., a professor in the Department of Anthropology who has researched and published on peyote for more than 3 decades, discusses how indigenous societies would not continue this practice if it were maladaptive, as they would see it as causing problems for their children and pregnancies. A 70-year-old woman from Reddit said, "I've been a member of NAC for 35 years, raised 3 kids eating medicine. I've seen babies, kids, nursing mothers using the medicine, both in ceremony and daily life. Truthfully, the families and kids I know that eat peyote are more well-behaved, more intelligent, can focus and sit still, do better in school, and have more confidence. That's my opinion after being with literally hundreds of peyote kids in and out of the teepee." And yet, if you turn to a Reddit r/microdosing search of pregnancy for insight, there are strong insights from both sides. For example, a thread called Microdosing While Pregnant or Breastfeeding contained back-and-forth comments such as the following. Isn't the problem here that there are absolutely no long-term studies? They might think it's fine and that their kids came out fine, but what, in 5, 10, 15 years? Are you really that short-sighted? That is the kind of just-say-no accusation that would no longer fly in any other context, but pregnant mothers still get piled on the instant they suggest doing something heterodox. You won't be able to find any studies on the safety because nobody on an ethics panel would ever dream of okaying it. Nobody would be able to tell you how that affects development because nobody knows. Judging so harshly with zero context, zero science-based understanding, and zero relevant personal experience is a completely understandable but regrettable reaction. Gaslighting each other is something our society teaches us to do instinctively, but I don't think we should keep doing it. Big no-no. You're gambling with a person's future. Hippies in the 70s fucked like bunnies. We should have seen a bump in birth defects following these years. If you're microdosing for depression, anxiety, etc., I'd talk to your doctor about alternatives. While advising caution isn't wrong, I do think you miss the mark when proposing that there's a plethora of alternatives that are completely risk-free, whereas mushrooms would be horrifyingly irresponsible. What this last poster argues is that pain-relieving substances like Tylenol, anti-inflammatory substances like aspirin, psychoactive substances like caffeine, antidepressant substances such as SSRIs, all of which have toxicity rates and LD50s higher than psilocybin, all of which are synthesized in a lab and sold to consumers for profit versus plucked from the earth for free, are allowed to be consumed while pregnant. Meanwhile, each of these substances has studies showing that they are known to potentially increase the risk of miscarriages or birth defects at certain doses, yet there remains a mainstream narrative to shun psychedelics while evidence for side effects is lacking. Do I have an opinion on this, you ask? There doesn't appear to be enough conclusive scientific data to have an informed opinion. I just wanted to present you with what I found. I will, however, just throw out that there are always more conservative ways of dealing with some of the difficulties that arise during or after pregnancy, like meditation, yoga, breathwork, exercise, talk therapy, herbal remedies, listening to relaxing music, or the like, that can always be exhausted before any chemical interventions are considered if one wanted to lower any risk-benefit ratio. But that's as far of an opinion as I'm willing to form for now. Is there anyone else who should avoid microdosing? Didn't Sid Barrett lose his marbles from taking too many psychedelics? Psychedelics don't cause psychosis in healthy populations, but people who have an existing condition of, a predisposition to, or even a first-degree relative with psychotic or bipolar episodes are often cautioned to avoid psychedelics, or at least it appears to be a rule-out condition in scientific studies for fear of triggering psychotic episodes. Because of this, there isn't much clinical data available on psychedelics and these kinds of conditions in general, let alone with microdosing. I did, however, find a survey of 541 people living with bipolar disorder who had consumed magic mushrooms, describing their intentions, experiences, and perceptions. The average rating of how helpful they found psilocybin was 4 on a scale of 1, not at all helpful, to 5, extremely helpful, while the overall harmfulness of psilocybin was rated 1.6 on a scale of 1, not at all harmful, to 5, extremely harmful. That said, almost a third of participants reported some kind of adverse or unwanted effect after using psilocybin, including new or increasing manic symptoms, sleep disturbances, and anxiety, and 18 described going to the emergency room or needing hospitalization. The surveyors said, "These findings suggest some positive impacts of psilocybin use, but future research is needed to figure out what factors may contribute to the likelihood of negative impacts. Until we know more, a cautious approach to psilocybin use is needed." To date, there was no published research to be found on safety considerations that focus on microdosing and cardiac conditions, but I did come across a hypothetical cardiac concern based on psychedelics' stimulating effects on the cardiovascular system. The first general concern is that individuals with cardiac conditions should avoid stimulants, and the second, more specific concern relates to psychedelics' influence on the 5-HT2B receptors. Chronic stimulation of 5-HT2B receptors in other pharmaceutical medications has been shown to result in valvular heart disease, cardiac hypertrophy, and abnormal mitochondrial function. But for now, it is theoretical, unresearched, and unclear whether microdosing stimulates these receptors enough to cause these same problems. Can microdosing be combined with certain medications or supplements? Lithium or tramadol, for example, seem to pop up as medications to avoid using in combination with psychedelics, as they can result in potential negative consequences, like an increased risk of seizure. Because of this, Dr. James Fadiman, the father of microdosing mentioned earlier, and his colleague, Sophia Korb, collected data through their long-term study of hundreds of people who microdosed independently, mainly with LSD and psilocybin. They compiled a list of medications, supplements, and drugs that, until now, are not known to cause any adverse side effects when combined with microdosing. The responsibility of keeping that list up to date has since been handed over to the Microdosing Institute, a global education, community, and research platform based in the Netherlands, established in 2017, who build vital connections in society and bring together ancestral wisdom with modern science to allow for safe, conscious, and effective microdosing with psychedelics. To access the list, go to https://microdosinginstitute.com/ and search for "Can microdosing be combined with medications or supplements?" Because microdosing is still understudied, they emphasize that no one is currently knowledgeable enough in the field of microdosing to be able to advise you on the interactions of microdosing and your medications, and that the list doesn't guarantee that you can microdose safely while taking any of the medications listed. They then encourage readers to always consult your doctor first if you plan to combine, stop, or phase out medications. On that note, below is a list of drugs/medications I've come across that lack evidence of being dangerous in combination with microdosing psilocybin, but may blunt their effects because they act upon the same systems or receptors in the brain. If any of these pertain to you, and when you choose to have a discussion with your healthcare provider: SSRIs, MAOIs, Remeron, Trazodone, antipsychotic medications, benzodiazepines, buspirone, alpha-2 agonists, beta blockers, gabapentinoids. What else should I discuss with my healthcare provider? You've made an excellent choice in educating yourself on the matter first so that you can be equipped and ready to create a dialogue. While taboos and stigmas still surround the topic of psychedelics, you shouldn't fear the idea of having a grown-up conversation with your physician. Perhaps they're already more in the loop than you are, but don't feel the need to advertise the topic due to concerns around licensure or insurance. Don't get discouraged if your doctor is uninformed on the matter and thinks psychedelics might be risky or extreme. Provide them with resources that will allow them to educate themselves so you can both make an informed decision about your healthcare. Here are some example resources to get you started. Human Hallucinogen Research: Guidelines for Safety. A research paper that first briefly discusses the unique history of human hallucinogen research and then reviews the risks of hallucinogen administration and safeguards for minimizing these risks. https://psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. The Psychedelic Medicine Association is a society of physicians, therapists, and healthcare professionals looking to advance their education on the therapeutic uses of psychedelic medicines. We provide you with education and informational tools to help you feel confident to discuss psychedelic medicines with your patients. Create your professional profile and connect with like-minded health professionals as well as the organizations shaping the psychedelic industry. https://www.opennurses.org. The Organization of Psychedelic and Entheogenic Nurses, OPEN Nurses, represents nurses at all levels of training who work with patients utilizing therapeutic psychedelic medicines. We exist to establish best practices, clearly define appropriate care in psychedelic sessions, elucidate a code of ethics and conduct, advocate for the full inclusion of nurses in psychedelic therapy, provide continuing education related to psychedelic therapy, and provide a place for professional networking. https://www.psychedelicstoday.com. We bridge scientific, academic, philosophical, societal, and cultural disciplines, covering up-to-the-minute developments and diving deep into crucial topics. Together, we are leading the discussion in this rapidly evolving ecosystem. https://psychedelic.support. Psychedelic Support is the leading online education and therapeutic platform in the psychedelic space, advocating for mental health and well-being worldwide. If they still feel uncomfortable answering your questions, ask to be referred to someone who may be more knowledgeable about the subject. Or if they're making a conclusive decision to shut you down based on a lack of research or evidence, you may consider seeking out other opinions yourself. Keep in mind, they may be more concerned about themselves than they are about you, which you can't blame them for, as everyone puts themselves first to whatever degree is necessary for survival, but you should just keep this in the back of your mind as you hear their opinion. Anyone else we should know about? Well, me, I suppose. The remainder of what you'll read and hear isn't just theoretical gibberish picked up from ChatGPT. I've been researching and experimenting with psychedelics for more than a decade, refining my approach and making mistakes along the way, enjoying blissful experiences and enduring difficult ones. In the last 10 years, I've seen the topic of psychedelics go from something you whispered about to close friends, to something bordering on trendy in the media, and I've been a proud part of the population pushing the movement in that direction. Why? The reasons why people are microdosing seem to be many and growing. Throughout history, humans have used psychedelics to connect with the divine, the earth, their tribe, or themselves. More recently, taking smaller doses of psychoactive substances has been utilized as a biohack for health, well-being, sleep, and performance. The latter focuses on the emerging benefits of psychedelics facilitating neuroplasticity, the ability of the neural network to form and reorganize synaptic connections, enabling different parts of the body and brain to communicate. This creates opportunities to change patterns in behavior and activity, So with intention and focus, we can rewire our brains to inspire new, more desirable ways of being, or let go of old, undesirable ways of being. For brevity's sake, I've listed many of the most common motivations people have for turning to microdosing, along with a short description and footnote links to specific resources to learn more about each topic. They are listed in alphabetical order for the convenience of finding a particular use case you might be looking for. This list should give you a head start on discovering many of the common motivations for seeking out microdosing and inspire your own research or motivations. If you don't find the use case you're looking for, don't lose hope. Continue searching for additional information that may have emerged by the time you read this. Note that while most of the studies, surveys, or anecdotal references below are focused on psilocybin, a few of them also include combined results of microdosing with other classic psychedelics like LSD. Addiction. A systematic review of 16 published studies, 7, 43.75%, focused on alcohol use disorder, or AUD, 5, or 31.25%, on tobacco use disorder, or TUD, and the remainder on cocaine use disorder, or CUD, 1, 6.25%, opioid use disorder, 1, 6.25%, nicotine use disorder, 1, 6.25%, and multiple substance use disorders, SUDs, 1, 6.25%, had psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy used in 10 studies, 62.5%, with doses ranging from microdosing to 20 to 40 milligrams per 70 kilograms, which saw significant reductions in alcohol consumption, smoking cessation, and related psychological improvements. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found reduced substance dependency as a benefit of microdosing. ADD/ADHD. An analysis of 2 studies finds that ADHD symptoms are lower in the microdosing group versus conventional ADHD medication after 4 weeks. An anonymous survey of 2,347 people found that microdosers attributed microdosing to enhanced attention, among other things. Alcohol consumption. A double-blind randomized clinical trial with 93 participants with alcohol use disorder reduced the percentage of heavy drinking days during 32 weeks of follow-up in the psilocybin group compared to the placebo. In an article called "Are Mushrooms the Social Drug of 2024? An Investigation?", Fortisa Latifi observes the trend of people drinking less and says, "Shrooms appear to fit into the lives of those who want to cut back on the booze but still socialize and let loose." Anxiety. An anonymous survey of 2,347 people found microdosers attributed microdosing to decreased anxiety, among other things. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found reduced anxiety as a benefit of microdosing. Asthma relief. Activation of 5-HT2A receptors in rats is necessary and sufficient for the anti-asthma effects of psychedelics like psilocybin. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for asthma yields posts such as "Asthma Improving," where readers can find reports like, "I've been microdosing psilocybin on and off for a couple of years. My latest round of 220 milligrams 3 times a week is showing some spectacular results, including a reduction of wheezing after my evening shower and after bike riding. This wheezing has been going on for decades." Athletic performance. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in cardiovascular endurance as a benefit of microdosing. There are anecdotal reports of sportsmen participating in extreme snowboarding, mountain biking, surfing, and various other sports that attest to microdoses for improvements in focus, stamina, reflex time, balance, and coordination. Autism. 233 adults with high autism quotient scores completed a survey about their psychedelic use, and the majority of participants attributed reductions in psychological distress and social anxiety and increases in social engagement to their psychedelic experiences. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for autism yields posts such as, "My thoughts are less rigid," where readers can find reports like, "I was diagnosed with autism. I'd have an insane tunnel vision that disables me from doing anything else other than what I'm focused on for an entire day. I would previously go 12 hours without eating and have anxiety all day before microdosing LSD. Now, food actually tastes good. I smoke less weed because I look forward to actually eating it. I am a lot better at multitasking. I feel like I can put my mind to anything, and not in a manic-depressive way. Overall, it's been a month of taking small doses every day, and I've noticed no ill side effects. Even just my vision is brighter. It seemed as if I was seeing in black and white before, and now there's life." Bipolar disorder. A survey of 541 people living with bipolar disorder who had experience with consuming magic mushrooms described their intentions, experiences, and perceptions. The average rating of how helpful they found psilocybin was 4 on a scale of 1, not at all helpful, to 5, extremely helpful, while the overall harmfulness of psilocybin was rated 1.6 on a scale of 1, not at all harmful, to 5, extremely harmful. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for bipolar yields posts such as, "Any bipolar folks who microdose?" where readers can find reports like, "I was diagnosed with cyclothymia, which is within the bipolar spectrum or range. I have been microdosing for well over a year, and it has really helped with the depression side of things. I still have my days, but they are not as intense, and I would even call them more of a melancholy mood than depression, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. My mania is also less intense, and if anything, microdosing has provided me with the insight to recognize both and work through each mood as they come. It has given me a piece of my life back that has been missing since I was young, and for that, I will always be forever grateful." Chronic pain. The majority of 187 microdosers and 163 macrodosers surveyed for using psychedelics, primarily psilocybin, for pain found higher reduction of symptoms compared to more conventional medications, NSAIDs, opioids, cannabis, etc. Low-dose psilocybin may provide benefits to patients with chronic neuropathic pain with minimal physical or psychotropic side effects. Cluster headaches. Varying doses of psychedelics have provided more anecdotal relief than any other intervention for relieving pain caused by cluster headaches, with a significant amount of information being collected at clusterbusters.org. Creativity. An interview study of 21 participants in a group of users taking small doses of psychedelics not for the purpose of intoxication but to enhance everyday functioning found reports of increased creativity. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in creativity as a benefit of microdosing. Depression. A naturalistic observational study finds psilocybin microdosers demonstrate greater improvements in mood and mental health after 1 month relative to non-microdosing controls. 44% of a survey of 1,102 current or past microdosers reported their mental health was much better as a consequence of microdosing. Eating disorders. In a global survey study that recruited 7,648 respondents self-reporting various eating disorders, psychedelics were among a small set of drugs that rated positively for relief of ED symptoms. A study of 28 participants who self-reported a lifetime eating disorder found that psychedelics like psilocybin were effective in significantly reducing depression and significantly increasing their quality of life, which may suggest that psychedelics play a role in aiding in the recovery of individuals with eating disorders. A Phase 1 trial of psilocybin therapy, which included psychological support by trained therapists, was found to be safe and well tolerated for the 10 female participants. 4 participants showed eating disorder examination, or EDE, scores that decreased at a 3-month follow-up, which is considered clinically significant. Emotional availability. Current and former microdosers scored higher on measures of open-mindedness when compared to non-microdosing controls. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in emotional insights and awareness as benefits of microdosing. Energy. A large percentage of more than 1,000 microdosing participants reported having increased energy. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in energy as a benefit of microdosing. Focus and productivity. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in focus, concentration, and productivity as benefits of microdosing. 19 studies from PubMed and Scopus that varied in design, with some being observational, others placebo-controlled, and some relying on self-reported data, were analyzed and found that microdosers reported positive effects such as increased focus and better daily function. IBD/Crohn's. In an article called Psychedelics, the Microbiome, and IBD, a next-generation IBD medication, Shea Puckett says, while the research is still young, psychedelics may have a twofold benefit against IBD by directly reducing inflammatory pathways in the GI tract and improving neuroplasticity to enact lasting positive effects in the gut-brain microbiome axis. Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are known to relate to a complex system involving genetic and environmental risk factors, fueling a perfect storm, and it appears that psychedelics may disrupt several mechanisms of the IBD cycle to promote healing. A literature review explores evidence that psychedelic compounds may offer a potential application in the treatment of pathologies related to autoimmunity. Authors propose that psychedelics have the potential to lessen or resolve autoimmunity by targeting psychosomatic origins, maladaptive chronic stress responses, inflammatory pathways, immune modulation, and enteric microbiome populations. Immune system. A single moderate dose of psilocybin has both acute and persisting effects on the immune profile in 30 healthy participants. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for immune system actually yields more posts about people questioning whether microdosing compromised their immune system and made them more vulnerable to colds, although one might question whether or not this search result is skewed because people who are not getting sick are not posting about not getting sick. Inflammation. Psilocybin immediately reduced concentrations of the pro-inflammatory cytokine TNF-A and other biomarkers like decreased concentrations of circulating IL-6 and CRP. Psychedelics like psilocybin regulate inflammatory pathways via novel mechanisms. Introspection. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in introspection and meditation as a benefit of microdosing. Data from 118 informative responses from an online survey revealed greater self-acceptance and sense of awareness of themselves and their relationship to both others and the world from microdosing. Long COVID. Anecdotal reports, case reports, and Reddit investigations of relief from long COVID physical and psychological symptoms have been popping up over the last couple of years. Longevity. A recent study found that psilocin extended the lifespan of human skin and lung cells by over 50%, as well as increased survival in the age of mice from 50% to 80% over 10 months. Lyme disease. A case study of a 70-year-old man with Lyme disease who was not responding to antimicrobial or psychotropic pharmaceuticals reported experiencing significant improvement soon after taking microdoses of psilocybin 3 times weekly. Use cases for psilocybin are limited, but there are use cases for other psychedelics, which could have further implications for the use of psilocybin. A CNN Health article reports a woman diagnosed with Lyme disease, dealing with related foot pain for over 20 years, who accidentally overdosed on a powdered form of LSD, thinking it was cocaine, and discovered her foot pain disappeared for 5 days after. It later returned, but she was able to control it by using microdoses of LSD and lower doses of her usual morphine for a couple of years before she could completely stop using both. A book called Microdosing with Amanita muscaria by Baba Masha includes a report of someone with Lyme disease who reduced all of their symptoms and eventually found their blood test came back clean of any indication of it. Meditation. An analysis of numerous studies found that mindfulness training intensified positively experienced drug-induced ego dissolution, while psychedelics were able to enhance meditation depth and engagement with formal spiritual practices in expert and novice meditators, respectively. In a Reddit post in r/microdosing called Microdosing and Meditating, a commenter who microdosed on days 1, 3, and 5 of an 8-day meditation retreat reports, "The last 3 days I noticed great changes. My mind is so much calmer and more manageable now, and depressive thoughts have receded to a very minimal background level. I'd recommend supporting meditation with microdosing rather than the other way around. The constant meditation revealed the subtle effects of the microdosing much more clearly than in daily life, I guess." Memory. An anonymous survey of 2,347 people found microdosers attributed microdosing to enhanced memory, among other things. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in memory as a benefit of microdosing. Migraines. An exploratory study with 10 participants showed significant reductions in migraine measures during a 2-week assessment after the single administration of a low oral dose of psilocybin. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found reduction in migraines as a benefit of microdosing. Mood. An anonymous survey of 2,347 people found microdosers attributed microdosing to improved mood, among other things. A naturalistic observational study finds psilocybin microdosers demonstrate greater improvements in mood and mental health after 1 month relative to non-microdosing controls. OCD. 9 subjects were administered up to 4 single-dose exposures to psilocybin, ranging from sub-hallucinogenic to frankly hallucinogenic, resulting in marked decreases in OCD symptoms of variable degrees observed in all subjects, with improvement generally lasting past the 24-hour mark. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for OCD yields posts such as "Started MD 1 month ago, OCD," where readers can find reports like, "I suffer from severe OCD in the form of body repetitive mutilation, where I severely pick my fingernails off and the skin layers to muscle underneath. I've been doing this as long as I can remember. I started microdosing 4 weeks ago, 0.4 grams, every other day. My compulsions are little to none. I feel no desire to hurt myself. Little interest in my hands. I don't want to get my hopes up too soon, but I think I'm on the road to recovery." Parkinson's disease. In an open-label pilot trial, 12 participants received 2 doses of psilocybin with psychotherapy. There were no serious adverse events or exacerbations of psychosis, and on the contrary, non-motor and motor symptoms, as well as performance in select cognitive domains, improved post-treatment and were sustained until the final safety assessment 1 month following drug exposure. A Reddit r/microdosing post tagged psilocybin shares, "It's been about 4 years since my grandpa was diagnosed. One of the main symptoms that come with Parkinson's is severe depression. And wow, hearing my grandpa talk about wanting to die was tough. But about 4 to 5 months ago, he started microdosing while also taking other types of mushrooms for the brain and his shakes. His shakes are way down, and he is the absolute happiest I've seen him in 5 years. It's like I have my grandpa back. I've always believed in psychedelics being able to change the world, but now I'm 150% sure. Perimenopause and menopause. An article called Exploring the Positive Impact of Psilocybin on Menopause states, there has been a growing interest in seeking alternative therapies to alleviate the discomfort and distress associated with menopausal symptoms, including mood swings, depression, hot flashes, night sweats, sleep disturbances, anxiety, and stress. Especially for women who are not able or do not want to undergo hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, it can be a greater difficulty to find relief. Psilocybin seems to be a promising alternative that may offer the long-sought relief. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for menopause yields posts such as 58-year woman, microdosing has been a game changer, where readers can find reports like, there have been no side effects other than a 100% improvement in my mood and my ability to be a nicer human being, to others and to myself. Postmenopause is a crazy ride, and we need all the help we can get. If you know an older gal that seems to be in a funk, tell her about microdosing. PMS and PDD. A smaller percentage of more than 1,000 microdosing participants report alleviation of symptoms in premenstrual syndrome as one benefit of microdosing. An article titled, Do Psychedelics Alter the Menstrual Cycle? Shares a number of anecdotal reports of psychedelic macrodoses triggering menstruation or rebalance cycles, and microdoses helping premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Porn addiction. A study examined self-reported symptoms of problem gambling, sexual addiction, compulsive buying, and eating disorders in a sample of 1,107 and use of psychedelics and other psychoactive drugs. Psychedelic users reported greater well-being and lower behavioral addiction symptoms. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for porn yields posts such as, Microdosing cured my porn addiction, where readers can find reports like, I had been addicted to porn for about 17 years, from ages 11 to 28. I've tried and failed to quit porn through force of will, being more active, replacing the addiction, etc., but I never made it more than a week or two, and that was with extreme exertions of will. I bought 0.1 gram shroom microdose pills. After taking it every 3 days for a few weeks, I tried jerking off without watching porn, and I quickly noticed that the previously unbreakable habit of boredom/loneliness leads to porn, masturbation, orgasm, was shattered. I haven't watched porn to jerk off for 45 days, and this requires next to no exertion of will. I cannot overstate how happy I am to be free of this addiction. Postpartum depression. A survey of 411 participants describes various anecdotal instances of relief from postpartum depression symptoms. A Vice article titled, I ate psychedelic mushrooms to treat my postpartum depression, describes Julie Ugelholt turning around a traumatic birth and postpartum depression as she went from things like, you hear about all these mothers for whom life takes on a whole new meaning, and that just wasn't how I felt. My life had never felt more hollow. To, taking shrooms made it easier for me to access positive thoughts and feelings. I could suddenly feel joy again. Problem solving. A sample of 38 participants who were tested for cognitive enhancing abilities resulted in both convergent and divergent thinking performance improvements. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in thought clarity and problem solving as a benefit of microdosing. PTSD and trauma healing. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found reduced sensitivity to trauma as a benefit of microdosing. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for PTSD yields posts such as PTSD and microdosing, where readers can find reports like, I've been microdosing for a month now. Before, I was suffering from severe depression, suicidal thoughts, intrusive thoughts, compulsions, fear, OCD episodes, anxiety panics, nightmares, and unknowingly had undiagnosed PTSD since childhood. I'm not waking up to fear and blood anymore. I'm sharing compassion for myself when I never had that for myself for the last 30 years. I'm now making myself aware that I'm in a safe place, away from the unsafe place as a kid on a daily basis. I now feel like I'm living. I can actually say I'm happy and mean it. My family, husband and 7-year-old son, is enjoying the change. Sleep quality. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in sleep quality as a benefit of microdosing. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for sleep quality yields posts such as "Microdosing improves my sleep by a factor of 10, where readers can find reports like, "Went from tossing and turning all night and waking up tired and not wanting to go, to a decent sleep schedule with longer periods of deep sleep and only recalling 1 or 2 tosses or turns. I have a Fitbit and love to use the sleep insights and heart rate for psychedelics. It's a good tool." Smoking, tobacco, and marijuana. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found quitting smoking as a benefit of microdosing. A study of 613 lifetime classic psychedelic users showed higher odds of healthier tobacco-related behavior attributed to respondents' most significant psychedelic experience. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for reducing marijuana yields posts such as, "Can we talk microdosing and weed?" where readers can find reports like, "Microdosing helped me quit cannabis. I had way less desire to use, and I also put in some conscious but gentle intentional effort to reduce use. A few days after starting microdosing, I reduced cannabis use to after 8 p.m. only. But I started just holding my vape pen in the evenings and hardly actually using it. It was like a security blanket. I found when I put it to my lips, I would stop and pull it away again. I just didn't have the desire to be high. 2 weeks after starting microdosing, I had reduced to 0 use, and now I'm on day 5 cannabis-free. I hadn't planned to fully quit when I started microdosing, but it just felt right and feels right." Sexual connection and performance. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found improvements in empathy and connection, though not specifically sexual, as a benefit of microdosing. A study of 4 couples microdosing psilocybin during sex reported things like improvements in connection, enhanced sensory experience, elevated desire, and reduced anxiety. An analysis of 261 people reveals reported improvements in enjoyment of sex, sexual arousal, satisfaction with sex, attraction to their partner, their own physical appearance, communication, and their sense of connection for up to 6 months after a macrodose of psychedelics, which theoretically may show implications for microdosing. Social anxiety. An anonymous survey of 2,347 people found microdosers attributed microdosing to enhanced sociability, among other things. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found extroversion, confidence, and verbal fluency as benefits of microdosing. SSRIs. A study of 46 participants in a 6-month follow-up study of a Phase 2 double-blind randomized controlled trial involving patients with moderate to severe major depressive disorder found a greater degree of improvement in psychosocial functioning, meaning in life, and psychological connectedness in participants treated with psilocybin versus those treated with an SSRI. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for SSRIs yields posts such as, "Has anyone here ever microdosed to replace and/or taper off of antidepressants?" where readers can find reports like, "I told my doc that I was sick of the side effects of SSRIs and wanted to get off them. He advised titrating down over a few weeks and keeping a close eye on my mood. I didn't mention the shrooms. At the same time, I started microdosing 0.2 grams natalensis 4 days on, 3 off, or thereabouts. That was 18 months ago. After 6 weeks, I was off the SSRIs. although it was 6 months before I could trip on sensible doses, suggesting to me that SSRIs mess your brain up for much longer than you'd expect from their half-life. Stress. Qualitative reports based on a sample of 278 participants found a reduction in stress as a benefit of microdosing. Searching Reddit r/microdosing for stress yields posts such as "Microdosing in a period of work-related stress," where readers can find reports like, "Microdosing has helped me in short and long term with all kinds of stress. Sometimes it's the only thing that gets me going." That and the fact that the bills need to be paid. It also helps seeing things in a completely new perspective. You can still perform well at work, but also be able to drop the unwanted stress. I think of it as not taking things too seriously. It's only work. Stroke. Data from a study supports a novel therapeutic approach of psilocybin in stroke, as psilocybin reduced brain infarction and improved locomotor behavior in stroke rats. The protective mechanisms involved regulating brain-derived neurotrophic factor expression, a protein in the brain and nervous system that plays a crucial role in neuronal health and function. In a Reddit thread called "Psilocybin Stroke Recovery," there are reports like, "I started microdosing a few years after my stroke, and it has helped immensely with my energy and mood." In another Reddit thread called "LSD or psilocybin microdosing good for stroke recovery?" there are reports like, "I'm personally convinced my stroke recovery has been significantly aided by the improved mood, verbal ability, and perhaps neuroplasticity improvements of microdosing." Therapy enhancement. Anecdotal reports within 118 responses from an online survey record use cases like, "I had tremendous success in recently treating decades of aftermath of long-term abuse, trauma, and loss with full-dose psychedelic medicines. I am microdosing now for maintenance in conjunction with talk therapy, and it has been nothing short of miraculous for me." Searching Reddit r/microdosing for therapy yields posts such as "Microdosing and Therapy," where readers can find reports like, "I told my therapist. I had immediate relief from my PTSD symptoms and overall anxiety, and she saw it. As I continued to microdose and learn more about psychedelics, I shared what I was learning with my therapist. After about a year, she told me she had been worried at first, but seeing how it changed me, she started using mushrooms too." Traumatic brain injury. A narrative review of 29 scientific articles on the effects of psilocybin and where psilocybin was used in patients with TBI concluded that psychedelics may have benefits by reducing inflammation, promoting neuroplasticity and neuroregeneration, and alleviating associated mood disorders. A smaller percentage of more than 1,000 microdosing participants' reports describe alleviation of symptoms from traumatic brain injury, while former professional athletes like Daniel Carcillo, who retired because of brain concussions, have come back from suicidal ideations to feeling normal again while utilizing psychedelics. Weight loss. A survey of more than 170,000 participants who have reported having tried a classic psychedelic at least once in their life had significantly lower odds of being overweight or obese. A study of 613 lifetime classic psychedelic users were associated with higher odds of more healthy exercise-related behavior, more healthy diet-related behavior, and higher odds of having a healthy BMI attributed to respondents' most significant psychedelic experience. Where? Psilocybin is found in more than 200 species of mushrooms across every continent except for Antarctica. As you can imagine, people all over the globe have been experimenting with these psychedelic fungi across time and in a variety of different settings. Legality. In 1970, the United States government declared psychedelic drugs like psilocybin illegal, solely for political reasons, not scientific or medical, and pressured other nations to do the same. These regulations made it nearly impossible to research these substances and illegal to manufacture, distribute, or possess them. However, with individual use and clinical research expanding, restrictions are being rolled back worldwide. As the legal landscape is constantly changing, rather than creating a static list of the various statuses of every country and city, below are several resources that seem to be kept relatively up to date, where you can verify the most current status on your own. You should always verify your local and national laws to determine what specific restrictions remain in your area. https://data/worldwide-psychedelic-laws. https://psychedelics-today.com/2024/044/0-4/tracking-legal-psychedelics-in-the-and-worldwide. https://mushly.com/learn/legal-status-of-magic-mushrooms. https://voltaface.me/magic-mushrooms-legal. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/legal_status_of_psilocybin_mushrooms. Sourcing. Legality in your region obviously determines where you might be able to find a reliable source of psilocybin mushrooms. While there are retreat centers for large-dose experiences in certain countries where psychedelics are legal, or even medical centers or underground organizations in U.S. states where laws are less restrictive, sourcing microdoses is a little different. You can't just walk into your local Walgreens and grab a bottle off the shelf, so how might you acquire some? Drug dealers, generous friends, online vendors, foraging, or growing your own are all viable options. This should go without saying, but it's important to note that due to the nature of what's available at the moment and the legal limitations, it's of massive importance for your safety that you find a trusted and reliable source. If you can't, don't do it. Just be patient and put the message out into the universe that you're seeking a microdosing experience, and trust that the right source will come to you at the right time. Although sources were scarcer back then, I was interested in psychedelics for 2 years before the right opportunities began to surface, but the patience eventually paid off. Back when I first started smoking weed as a college student in the late 2000s, marijuana wasn't as culturally accepted as it is today. There weren't any dispensaries to go to. It wasn't even decriminalized, never mind legal. My point in telling you this is that my friends and I had to endure a large number of sketchy situations in order to get our fix, and to be honest, we're lucky we never got anything laced with some chemical. Granted, flowers aren't as easily tampered with as some mysterious white powder or pill like cocaine, ecstasy, or other drugs, but the mentality remains the same. In the same way, there are certain forms of psychedelics that are probably more easily identifiable than others. If you're given a baggie of what looks like dried, shriveled mushrooms, there's a good chance they're dried, shriveled mushrooms. If it looks like a bag full of mysterious white powder or pills, there's a good chance it is a bag of mysterious white powder or pills, containing who knows what. The point I'm reiterating is that if you can't find a pure form from a source you trust, then wait. The number of people who die because they indulged in a substance handed to them at a party or from some random dealer isn't a statistic you want to become. While test kits for drugs like MDMA have been available and encouraged for years, only just recently, to my knowledge, has the first ever test kit for psilocybin mushrooms become available, which you can find by searching psilocybin Q-test online. How do you find a trusted source? Well, while marijuana dispensaries are opening in certain areas around the nation, many people still get their weed from a good old-fashioned drug dealer. This might be you. Or maybe you know someone who has a reliable hookup. Word on the street is that an increasing number of weed dealers have expanded into the mushroom game as well. It doesn't hurt to ask. What if you don't know a weed dealer, or even someone who knows a weed dealer? Look for online psychedelic forums, seek out local meetups, or attend psychedelic conferences. Start to network, start to make friends in the space. Eventually, it's inevitable that you'll make the right connection. What if there aren't any local meetups and you don't have the means to attend psychedelic conferences? There are currently a few online vendors selling psilocybin microdose capsules, despite the federal legal implications of doing so. Who knows whether or not these websites are being monitored by the DEA, and whether or not you should buy a burner phone, log in from a Starbucks Wi-Fi, and use a fake account and crypto when you order them, but they're out there. I'm sure you can scour Reddit for other suggestions, and while I've never used any of these websites myself, I have heard of this one mentioned as a reliable source by other notable psychonauts in the space. https://goldenrulemushrooms.com/. Personally, I've never gone the route of foraging wild psilocybin mushrooms either, as the risk of misidentification can put you in the ER. So if this is a route you plan to adventure down, I would proceed with extreme caution and seek guidance from an experienced forager who knows a lot about identification first. There may be mushroom groups in your area to consider joining in order to find some foraging companions. Otherwise, the king of all mushroom nerds and thought leader in the psychedelic space, Paul Stamets, just released a book that might be of interest for this field of study. Psilocybin Mushrooms in Their Natural Habitats, a guide to the history, identification, and use of psychoactive fungi. In the early days, I was at the mercy of when psychedelics found me. Later, I learned you could order spores online, legally in nearly every state in America, for scientific observation under a microscope only, of course. There are still legal restrictions involved with growing and possessing mushrooms that vary across different regions, and in no way, shape, or form is this book advocating for the growth, consumption, or possession of these illegal substances, but I'm telling you what I did myself. Arguably the most classic guide in this department, written by Terence and Dennis McKenna under pseudonyms in the 1970s, is Psilocybin, Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. Although today, a Google search will yield a plethora of different guides or YouTube videos on how to cultivate your own strains. Private versus public settings. Now that you've researched the legal status of your geographical location and discovered where you might be able to source some of these magic mushrooms, you want to put some consideration into the actual physical location where you plan to take your microdose. The privacy of your own home might be the most comfortable place to begin your microdosing journey, at least until you've gotten a sense of proper dosing, which we'll talk about in the next chapter, and how taking small amounts of a psychedelic can make you feel. Being in the privacy of your own home has the benefit of a couch or bed if you start feeling tired, strange, or introspective and want to lie down. Perhaps you have a yard, porch, balcony, or common area if you want to go outside and enjoy the weather. Maybe you've laid out some art supplies, writing materials, musical instruments, or cleared space as a dance floor if you're feeling expressive. These are good ways to dip your toes into the world of microdosing. Once you become more comfortable with microdosing in private, you might take the practice into more public arenas. There are, of course, incremental steps that can be taken in this regard. Going on a hike or walk in a park, where you might say hello or stop for a quick chat with strangers, could be a good segue into more public areas. Microdosing before a yoga class or the gym, where you know some familiar regulars, might be the next step. Then you can venture into the world of small house parties with friends before graduating to bars, clubs, or similar venues to experience the social lubrication of microdosing. Next thing you know, you'll be on a world tour, microdosing before speaking engagements in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans. Or maybe not. Around whom? Whether you disclose what you're doing to others while in whatever environment you choose is certainly up to you, but lean toward whatever makes you feel most psychologically safe and comfortable. Coming across someone who disapproves of drugs could taint your whole experience and put you into a weird headspace. Practice judgment and caution with whom you interact and share this information with, as even at lower doses, you can still be psychologically sensitive to the emotions around you. If you do choose to disclose this information with others, it might do you good to have knowledge of anecdotal case studies and clinically proven benefits of psychedelics at the ready, in case you encounter some disapproving naysayers who spout things like, "Don't those things burn holes in your brain?" Having facts at your fingertips might extinguish the flames of stigma and judgment that others have burning inside them, as well as open the door for a more comfortable dialogue. Revisit why for some good resources to reference. With a coach or therapist. This book is intended to provide you with everything you need to feel comfortable microdosing on your own, but there are always good reasons to work with a coach or therapist as well. We benefit from aligning with others who have more knowledge than we do, and doing so can help us keep on track and accelerate our progress. Plus, it's always nice to have someone else to talk to about your journey. For example, an experienced microdosing professional can help you more easily determine the right substance, dose, or protocol that's right for you. Simply having someone you can reach out to with questions can also make a comforting difference. I've read reports of people saying that microdosing before their already existing therapy practice improves the effectiveness of the sessions. Doing so seems to accelerate the therapeutic outcomes by increasing access to, or amplifying the release of, emotions while working in a more open-minded headspace. Microdosers mention how they're better able to stay present and go deeper with difficult memories while in therapy. They often say that while prior to microdosing they understood the value of insights and tools provided in therapy, afterward they were able or more willing to make better use of them. Discussing microdosing with your therapist beforehand can also allow you both to be on the same page when looking for any differences between doing it sober. In choosing a coach or therapist to work with, ask about their own background or experience with microdosing, what benefits they've seen personally, as well as individuals they've worked with or gone through their programs. Something else to consider is whether or not they're trauma-informed, a hot topic in the worlds of psychology, healing, and psychedelics. While there might not be a concrete agreement of what a trauma-informed approach should consist of, despite the ever-growing number of modalities, philosophies, and certifications out there, a general foundation of knowledge about what trauma is, how it's stored in the body, how it impacts us, and how to release it is something to look for when choosing who to work with. Trauma-informed professionals understand the importance of creating a safe and comfortable dynamic and environment when recognizing and addressing the impacts of adverse events in someone's life. Compared to larger doses, microdosing poses a much smaller likelihood of someone being triggered into physically or emotionally reliving traumatic events of the past, but consuming any amount of a psychedelic can amplify thoughts or emotions stored within us, and it makes sense to work with someone who has knowledge and experience in this regard. How? Say you've grown or acquired some mushrooms that aren't already pre-capsuled. Now what? Preparation and storage. More than likely, they will already be, or your growing guide will instruct you on how to make sure they become, dehydrated. While you can break off bits or chop up these dehydrated mushrooms into tiny pieces, this won't ensure you're consuming consistent amounts of the psychoactive substance. Psilocybin concentration varies between caps and stems and even between different mushrooms of the same flush. The best way to ensure a consistent microdosing experience is to turn them into a powder with a blender or coffee grinder. Caution: make sure to either clean your blender or coffee grinder thoroughly or consume your next happy little smoothie or magical coffee on an appropriately planned day. More on planning in the chapter to come. This powder can then be either stored in a mason jar, scooped out with an appropriately sized spoon each time you add a microdose to a beverage or make a tea, or, the preferred method for myself and many others, turned into capsules. DIY capsule filling machines are affordable, easy to operate, make consistent doses, and are available in a variety of sizes. Note that psilocybin can be degraded by UV light, moisture, oxygen, and high temperatures, and will last the longest when stored in an airtight container in the freezer. Dosage. Various sources define the weight of a microdose slightly differently, but the loosely agreed upon range seems to be somewhere between 0.05 to 0.5 grams of dried mushrooms. I will say that, based on personal experience, as well as the mostly agreed upon definition of microdosing being sub-perceptible, for the upper end of this range to be considered a microdose is wild. In defining dose sizes, I've seen microdosing gurus say things like, "You probably won't need an experienced guide, but some people like to have a trusted friend present." I'm like, dude, the moment you're even thinking you might need a babysitter, you've well crossed the threshold of sub-perceptual. That's the equivalent of, say, going out with the intention of having one drink. We can assume that you'll be under the legal limit and can drive yourself home later. But if the bartender pours you a single beverage and says, "You probably won't have to call a taxi and leave your car here tonight, but you might want to have a trusted friend give you a breathalyzer before you stumble out and get behind the wheel," you'd say, "What kind of percentage of alcohol is in this thing?" I've taken a gram of mushrooms with the intention of seeing live music and never made it because a full-blown trip came on much harder than expected. Half a gram can be a very noticeable endeavor. If I want to have a good day where I really can't even tell I've ingested anything, but my thought patterns are healthy and smooth, I'm aiming toward the very lowest end of the 0.05 to 0.5 gram range. If I want the sparkle of an enhanced hiking experience or social stimulation, I'll shoot conservatively for somewhere in the middle. If I want to sort through what's going on in my life without full-on hallucinations, I'll make myself a half-gram mushroom tea and lie down in my bed with my eyes closed and a journal on standby. For people to consider a half gram as a go-about-your-normal daily routine type of dose is crazy to me. But hey, that's just my own 2 cents after 10+ years of experimentation. All I'm saying is that if you're brand new to microdosing and just looking for a mood boost while you go about your normal day, I personally wouldn't dive in at 0.5 grams. Apply the "start low and go slow" adage to your protocol as you feel out how each weight affects you. But personally, I would start at 0.1 or below if you want truly sub-perceptual. When it comes to microdosing, tiny increments create a fine line. What it boils down to is finding the right dose for the right environment for you. You might buy or make 0.2 gram capsules and experience increased anxiety and lowered productivity. Dropping down to 0.1 might be the perfect adjustment. Meanwhile, your sister might need to go up to 0.3 to feel anything at all. You might find that 0.1 is good for your normal daily routine, but dialing it up to 0.2 might make a live music experience better and your social gears turn more smoothly. And 0.4 might turn out to be your ideal dose for staying home with a coloring book and relaxing after a long week at the office. Your ideal dose can vary depending on your intended goals and what you have planned. Take the time to build a relationship with the strain you're working with and learn what your body, mind, and spirit need on any given day. Potency. Because we're dealing with mushrooms and not isolated psilocin, something else to consider is the potential for varying potency within each batch of mushrooms. Different strains of psilocybin-containing mushrooms, different batches, the age of the mushrooms, and how they've been stored can all affect potency, not to mention your own weight, size, metabolism, and whether or not any other substances are in your system that might come into play. Some laboratories have explored the range of psilocybin concentration in different mushroom strains, and that range can be anywhere from 0.5% all the way up to 2%. What that means is that someone might get a hold of 1 gram of mushrooms thinking they're taking 10 milligrams of psilocybin when in fact they're only taking half that dose. Or on the flip side, someone could consume 1 gram of mushrooms thinking they're taking 10 milligrams of psilocybin when, in fact, they're taking double. Obviously, sourcing is key, but until measured amounts of isolated compounds are available to the public legally, measuring out grams of mushrooms will continue to be a bit of a guessing game in terms of potency. When trying out new batches, your best bet is to stick to the rule of thumb that you can always take more, but you can never take less. There's no shame in dipping your toe in the water with smaller doses and then working your way upward. Each batch you come by may require a bit of recalibration of your dosing. I'd consider your whole journey a feel-it-out and trial-and-error process to some degree. Refining your dose over time. While some people find the same size microdose remains stable over time, others might find their optimal levels change. Stress, sleep, diet, tolerance, and consuming other substances might all affect your dosage throughout different phases of life. Likewise, maybe your initial dose seemed good when you first started, but now you're wondering if more is better. Go for it, but sensibly. Take the incremental increases slowly. If you find the increase contributes to adverse effects, dial it back again. No big deal. Accidentally overdosing. If you've been doggy paddling around the shallow end for a while before curiosity gets the best of you, you might find yourself feeling psychedelic effects that come on as a result of taking more than a microdose. If you're using a reliable source and are following the guidance laid out above, you probably won't find yourself too far in over your head and should be able to swim back to your comfort zone without a problem. If you do start feeling uncomfortable, however, the first thing to remember is that psilocybin is the safest mind-altering compound we know of, and that at even extremely large doses, there have been no reported fatalities. You're going to be fine. A trip to the ER is likely unnecessary and would probably make things worse. Hopefully, you're somewhere that you can sit down, breathe, and calm yourself through the rough patch until the overwhelming wave subsides, or even cry it out if you need to. You can always reach out to a friend or family member, someone who is experienced with psychedelics, or call Fireside Project's nonprofit psychedelic peer support hotline at 62-FIRESIDE, 1-623-473-7433, to talk you through what you're experiencing. Setting intentions. Perhaps you're coming to this book with a motivation to try microdosing in mind. Perhaps you found a new idea after flipping through Why. Either way, I'd suggest going into your microdosing practice with an intention, declaring it out loud to the universe, or writing it down. Take inventory of what changes you'd like to make in your life, then set a conscious aim to help build the vision of who you want to be or what you want to achieve. Setting clear intentions allows you to anchor the idea of how each aspect of your life contributes to your goals. Intentions also highlight the dissonance between where you are and where you want to be. Your aim is to reduce that friction and close the gap until your reality and your vision are aligned. Microdosing can help you boost the capacity to create your envisioned reality. Integration and journaling. Microdosing is for the long game. Lasting change is a cumulative effect that might not be seen overnight, but can be observed over time. Psychedelics are introspection enhancers, and it's good to jot your insights down. Journaling offers you the ability to look back and see how taking these tiny doses have inspired change and optimal outcomes. Journaling can also help you monitor doses and adapt your routines. This is especially important during the first few weeks when you're learning about the effects of psilocybin on your mind and body. The more you can reliably understand and recall how microdosing affects you early on, the more benefit you'll see in the long run when applying necessary changes. If you need some inspiration or writing prompts, consider any variations of the following kinds of questions. How is my mood on a scale of 1 to 10? Do I feel happier or less depressed overall? Are my moods more level or do they fluctuate more often? Am I better able to keep my emotions in check? Does the world seem brighter? Do my senses seem sharper? Am I more present? Am I more aware of my thoughts or emotions? Do I feel more or less anxious than usual? Do I feel calmer overall? Do I feel more guarded or more trusting? Am I more outgoing or less? Do I want to be around others more or less? Do I feel more or less connected with or empathetic to others? Am I more aware of how my actions affect my life or the lives of those around me? Do I feel more creative? Has my level of concentration improved? Do I feel more engaged in whatever I'm doing? Do I have a better understanding of how things work? Am I better at seeing alternative views? Have I been approaching challenges in different ways? Do I have more energy? Am I sleeping better? Am I dreaming more often or more intensely? Am I exercising more or eating better? Do I drink, smoke, or take other drugs or substances less often? Have I integrated any mindfulness practices into my life to supplement personal growth? Have I achieved any goals I set for myself? How do I feel about the past and the future? Revisit your intentions often as you strive toward your goals. If at any point your outcomes aren't what you envisioned, or you change your mind about achieving what you want, just create new intentions and adjust your North Star. When? Unlike macrodosing, microdosing doesn't need to be a planned, special occasion. Instead, you can weave psychedelic consumption into your daily routine to boost creativity, focus, energy, and connection with others. Timing, however, is an important factor when it comes to microdosing, especially when first starting out. Although effects are subtle, they are noticeable, and dosing at the right time in your life, day of the week, or time of day can influence your experience. Here, we'll discuss some things you may want to take into consideration while choosing when to microdose. Time of your life. Scenario 1. You have no friends, you hate your job, your car just got totaled by some asshole swerving into your lane, and honestly, what's the point of even going on? Is this the right time to start microdosing? Maybe. Maybe it'll give you the motivation to sort through the insurance claim, find a new career, be more sociable, and turn your life around. But maybe not. Maybe throwing a mind-altering substance into the mix isn't the wisest decision right now. Maybe finding a talk therapist or a life coach is a more conservative move during an emotionally vulnerable time in your life. Scenario 2. You're engaged, you've got a steady career, and your life is moving toward that white picket fence and 2.2 children scenario everyone is always talking about. Is this the right time to start microdosing? Maybe. Maybe it'll help prepare you to be the best partner and parent you could possibly be. But maybe you'll start to wonder if you'll regret never taking that backpacking trip through Europe your partner held you back from because they're not enthusiastic about traveling. Is that a dream you're willing to miss out on? Oof. Scenario 3. You're a journalist, and there are deadlines looming that your career depends on, but you've got writer's block. Is this the right time to start microdosing? Maybe. Maybe it'll help you push through that slump and hit the goals you need to achieve in your career. But maybe you'll start to reflect on whether this high-stress environment is conducive to your mental health and decide to risk a career break to write that novel that's been nagging at you for so long. These might be extreme scenarios, but they're not that far-fetched. I don't know where you are in your life, but taking a moment to pause and reflect on whether or not microdosing is a good idea to start at this particular time is wise. Psychedelics can alter the way you perceive the world around you and influence the way you navigate it. Mostly for the better, it seems, but once you start to open the door for potential change in direction, there might not be any going back. Time of the month for ladies. A search for scientific research on psychedelics and menstrual cycles churned out very little. I did come across a paper from 2024 that began by saying, sex as a biological variable, or SABV, has been historically neglected in medical research, and therefore sex-specific effects remain unclear in response to psychedelic treatments. The authors pointed out that male participants have been predominantly favored over female participants in studies across species in the name of simplicity to reduce concerns about hormone-related confounding effects. Based on the title of Potential Differences in Psychedelic Actions Based on Biological Sex, I expected to find some kind of new discovery. But I got all the way to the end of the paper before discovering that the authors were merely pointing out that variations in estrogen could potentially influence the efficacy of psychedelics in females across menstrual cycles. They then added that investigating this interaction in the context of psychedelic research could aid in the advancement of therapeutic outcomes. Well, duh. What I found most ironic in this paper was that while it was at least fair in acknowledging that incorporating SABV into research methodologies poses difficulties and hurdles, rather than actually taking the time to run a study that navigates those difficulties and hurdles, they simply took the time to point out that no one is running studies that navigate those difficulties and hurdles. Which is to say that other than pointing out the already obvious fact that women have periods and men don't, this paper effectively accomplished nothing else but to complain. Naturally, therefore, I had no choice but to turn to the true source of knowledge on the internet. As one poster put it, I took to the International Journal of Reddit for case studies. Searching r/microdosing for menstrual cycle will yield posts with titles such as, "Ladies, what's your experience with protocols and periods?" Or, "Question for the menstruating folks, mood effects of microdosing during different parts of your cycle?" Or, "Microdosing interfering with menstrual cycle?" As I'm not a specialist on menstrual cycles, nor have I had one myself, I don't want to step too far out of my lane here, but I did scroll through numerous posts to collect feedback. Generally, some said things like, "I've never noticed microdosing to have any effect on my cycle," while others said things like, "I have found that mushies definitely affect my menstrual cycle." In the emotional department, there are mentions of amplification of hormonal rage/misery/intolerance. Someone who usually has a difficult time letting out their emotions said they were able to really let go and have a good old ugly cry on my couch. Another offered that, "I find if it's a more angry kind of month, it helps less than if it's a weepy kind of month." Someone said, "My awareness is heightened. It's like I can see the storm roll in from double the distance away and have more time to duck and cover during the worst of it." Another learned she should put more attention into set and setting on days I know I am hormonally charged, while another wondered if it's worth skipping a dose altogether if she's already feeling hormonally wonky. In the physical department, some said microdosing triggered periods to arrive early, while others arrived late. Some described cramps as heavier, others lighter. Some experienced their first period in months, prior absence due to stress, the insertion of an IUD, or because they are in menopause. One concerned commenter expressed never having periods at all, then added, "But I'm a dude, so." To spare readers who are less interested in learning about heavier or lighter degrees of spotting or flow, I'll merely point to this resource for those interested in more insight, rather than add more detail. Good luck. Day of the week. Well, you may have heard about how microdosing LSD is fueling innovation in Silicon Valley. If you're new to microdosing, I certainly wouldn't recommend first trying it out on days you have professional commitments. Even if you're experienced with microdosing, doing it on a workday can be a gamble. Why, just the other day, I made the mistake of accidentally putting myself in a headspace that wasn't ideal for crafting corporate emails or doing sales outreach. I'm not even talking about consuming much more than a typical dose for myself, but it led to a far more introspective headspace and body high than I was hoping for. Fortunately, I work remotely, could take an early lunch break, and meditate through some stuff that was coming up, but it was a whole thing. And this cautionary tale comes from someone who has been microdosing for years, so if you're just starting out, it's probably a better risk-reward ratio to get your feet wet on your off days first. Likewise, take into consideration any important personal considerations on microdosing days. I wouldn't pop your first ever microdose the day you're supposed to be officiating a wedding or giving some big speech for a club you're a part of. If you've got a big social event or important parental responsibility, these might also be occasions to avoid until you're a tad more experienced. And it's probably safest for yourself and others to avoid any kind of intoxication before getting behind the wheel if you intend on microdosing on days you might have to drive. Just another consideration to throw out there. Next day. Not only are the days of something to think about, but the next day as well. If you find out your early experimentation results in disruption of your sleep schedule, you may not want to try microdosing before days you absolutely need to be well rested. This might not be the case, of course. Microdosing affects different people in different ways. You may microdose one day, sleep better than you ever have, and then feel an energetic afterglow the entire next day. But it's possible the next day you feel exhausted and irritable, so this is just something to keep in mind in your early days of experimentation. Time of day. You should be aware of how long it will take for the effects of the psychedelic substance you're working with to take hold so that you can time your dose accordingly. As a rule of thumb, with psilocybin, the effects will kick in within 30 to 45 minutes. I will tell you, however, I've had experiences where it seems like the effects come on almost immediately, and other times when I think, were these mushrooms old or something? Just to have them come on hard later than expected. Some factors that may affect the real or perceived onset of effects can have to do with the form of consumption, whole mushrooms versus powdered capsules, tea versus psilocin tablets, whether or not you've eaten anything recently, your current physical and mental state, and frankly, as strange as it might sound, how the mushrooms decide they're going to affect you that day. You should also be aware of how long the effects of the psychedelic substance you're working with will last. LSD or mescaline, for example, can last up to 8, 10, even 12 hours. The effects of psilocybin are closer to 4 to 6, which makes it a good beginner's substance while entering into the microdosing realm. Because microdosing can have a stimulating effect, I have read, heard, and experienced myself that morning, early afternoon, or generally at least 6 hours before you're trying to fall asleep are the best windows of time for most people to take their microdose, so that it doesn't interrupt sleep patterns. That said, just as caffeine can have a calming or down-regulating effect on some, microdosing might affect people differently. Those who don't experience a stimulating effect, therefore, might find taking it first thing in the morning makes them tired, which obviously isn't ideal if they were hoping to have a productive day. Realizing its effects can only come from trial and error, and you may find microdosing better suits you in the evening, as a relaxing protocol before bed. For example, in a Reddit r/microdosing post titled, "Psilocybin Microdosing Improves Sleep?" the poster wrote, "I normally jolt awake in full fight-or-flight mode nearly every night, but I have found that if I take it late in the day, I sleep through the night. It's a revelation. Last night I also had restless legs on going to bed, and so took a dose, and again, slept through the night without the urge to start running. It's early days for me on this, and it could just be placebo, or it could be the hypervigilance reduction I feel on microdoses." This post had numerous supporting comments like, "I notice a direct correlation between microdosing and better sleep. Fewer wake-ups during the night, faster back to sleep when they do happen, and get up feeling very well rested in the morning. I will often take a dose in the late afternoon or evening just before bed." I found out about the suggestion of taking a microdose right before bed after listening to a recent podcast with Paul Stamets. His philosophy was based on a theory that neurogenesis, or the growth and development of nervous tissue, occurs during sleep, and that microdosing psilocybin before bed might accelerate or fuel this process. After listening to this same podcast, my cousin jumped on the idea immediately. That night, he had an extremely vivid dream of being on a boat at sea. Having to urinate with nowhere else to go, he decided to pee overboard. Midstream, a voice shouted, "What are you doing?" and snapped him out of his little nocturnal adventure. He found himself standing in the middle of his bedroom with his girlfriend, wondering why the hell he was pissing all over their floor. Take from that what you will when deciding whether or not to microdose before bed, but for my cousin, as he put it, that little experiment is over. Others have reported experiencing the effect on dreams during sleep while microdosing, which could be perceived as a positive or a negative side effect, depending on the person and how much they're pissing off their girlfriend. Sorry, couldn't resist. Search Reddit's r/microdosing for dreams, and you'll find posts with titles like Dreaming Again, Dreaming Every Night, Stopped Dreaming, Realistic Dreams, Dreaming About Dying, Lucid Dreaming, Weird Dreams, Dark and Creepy Dreams, Vivid Dreams I Can't Wake Up From, Reduced Frequency of Vivid Dreams, Dreaming About Real-Life Problems, and more. Based on this sample, it would appear as though the effects of microdosing on dreams might be as variable as the dreamers themselves. Mood. You might be thinking, mood isn't a time on the clock or day on the calendar, but it is an equally important consideration for when you might want to microdose. Now, there seems to be this narrative in the community about avoiding psychedelics when you're in a bad mood or during times of distress. The reason for this is that psychedelics tend to amplify emotions, so the rationale is that if you're feeling depressed or anxious, these feelings might get amplified. I'm not in denial about this possibility, and would certainly suggest that if you're brand new to psychedelics, this may not be the right time to dip your toes in the water. That said, and perhaps something to consider after you've gotten your microdosing legs underneath you a bit there, Bambi, I've found that microdosing while feeling negative emotions can actually be quite beneficial. In fact, I tend to reach for a microdose the most when I'm in a bad mood, using it as a tool to disrupt negative thought loops. Look, maybe it's a use case thing. Some people want to take a bit of psychedelics to boost their creativity, improve focus while playing a sport, or address physical health concerns. We saw the variety of motivations for microdosing under Why, and I'm certainly not hinting that any of them aren't valid. I've experimented with microdosing in many conditions, and taking a microdose to enhance an already beautiful day with recreational intentions is perfectly legitimate. What I'm getting at here is that, eventually, once you've accumulated a bit of experience with how these substances affect you, the narrative that you should avoid them when you're in a negative headspace becomes misleading. No, these aren't antidepressants, where if you're feeling down, they'll numb all your emotions just to keep you from feeling bad. Yes, they can amplify your negative emotions, that's true. But I think this narrative exists out of a fear of emotional amplification, when I've always found this amplification to be a magnifying glass for the purpose of taking a closer look at something. Psychedelics say, don't ignore this, examine it. If I'm triggered into anger by something going on at work or in my personal life, I want to know why. Sure, taking a microdose might pour gasoline on the fire, temporarily, but then you'll likely be taken into a headspace that's like, wow, do I really feel that strongly about this insignificant thing? Then you might start reflecting on why that insignificant thing bothered you so much. And then you might trace the trigger back to a moment in childhood that caused some kind of trauma that formed your ego's defensiveness in such situations. Shedding light on the source, you might be able to melt the anger away and better recognize similar triggers moving forward, giving you better control over your emotions in general. I've done this with sadness, loneliness, jealousy, envy, depression, or any other negative emotion you can think of. I've microdosed in all these scenarios with the intention of figuring out why, and every time I come out the other side better for it. I've been caught in horribly negative thought loops for hours that I couldn't break out of on my own, popped a microdose capsule, and within the hour I was having a blissful day. Using psychedelics to turn around a negative headspace has become my primary use of microdosing these days. So, to be honest, I don't really understand the narrative to avoid psychedelics when you're in a bad mood at all, and I hear it pushed by significant thought leaders in the space often. But maybe that's just me, and my own desire to self-analyze. If you're less introspective and just looking to get into microdosing for a happy little boost, it's possible that's what you get out of it. But I'd also warn you to be prepared to look at what's going on inside, even if that's not your intention. Because after more than a decade of experimentation and research, that's what I've found these substances tend to do. If you just want the bad feelings to go away without the introspection aspect layered on, they make other pills for that. I'll also add that I carry this attitude as someone with a decade-long meditation practice who knows how to regulate their breathing to calm down and has been exercising my whole life. I say this with the intention of expressing that I know how to deal with stress in sober ways. If you're someone who's an anxious mess with zero skills around regulating stress while sober and you're just hoping to dump a chemical into your system to fix your anxiety, it might catch you off guard when the precise reason you have anxiety in the first place starts coming to the surface, especially when your natural tendency has been to hide by altering your state with substances. It's probably wise to build a foundation of sober stress management techniques before trying psychedelics, because they can come in handy in the midst of emotional elevation that might inevitably result from taking these substances. Something else I'd be prepared for is that if you're in a seemingly perfect mood, taking a microdose might bring to the surface emotions you've been suppressing. The sun might be shining, the birds chirping, the butterflies flapping, and then, all of a sudden, your rainbow is dampened by the magnification of the red flags in your relationship you've been ignoring, the emotions around your pet dying that you never really processed, or some conflict with a friend that you brushed off as nothing. Whatever is simmering underneath is fair game to be brought to the forefront of your attention while microdosing. Being confronted with things you were trying to ignore certainly isn't a bad thing when it comes to growth and development. I'm just giving you a heads up about what's possible. These kinds of things might be dose-dependent and often be curtailed by adjusting to a smaller dose, but don't be blindsided if you take a microdose with the intention of being bubbly at a party and all of a sudden you find yourself feeling introspective and needing a moment alone. These things don't come without risks or side effects in that capacity. I outlined a bunch of support for the motivations people start microdosing in Why, like success stories of mood boosts or alleviation of anxiety. But what you hope for and what you get aren't always in sync. Impaired mood, increased anxiety, social interference, and cognitive interference were all reported challenges in some cases in one of the surveys I referenced. This isn't everyone. This isn't every time. Mostly, it's smooth sailing and happy days. But in the spirit of transparency, microdosing can be a roll of the dice depending on what's going on with you psychologically. That's why I wanted to add this to the When chapter, so you can keep it in mind when planning your microdosing days. Frequency. How often you microdose is an important consideration, and there are well-established protocols out there. For example, the Fadiman protocol. Dose 1 day, take 2 days off. The Stamets protocol. Dose 4 days in a row, then take 3 days off. The Microdosing Institute protocol. Dose every other day. To be honest, I've never tried any of these, not because I don't believe each of them could be beneficial for some, but because I certainly think a structured approach might be especially good for beginners learning to pace themselves. Having an easy-to-follow structure could allow you to focus more on intention setting, what you're noticing, and ongoing integration. There were different reasons for the creation of each protocol, and each has its advocates, but ultimately, each individual determines what's best for them. Part of the reason I never followed one was because information on microdosing wasn't as prevalent as it is today compared to when I first started experimenting with psychedelics. James Fadiman started growing in popularity after his 2015 interview on The Tim Ferriss Show. The Microdosing Institute wasn't established until 2017, and Paul Stamets didn't really start broadcasting his stack until around 2017. The other part of it was that I was never really a structure guy, even by the time I discovered these protocols. I get it, tracking things on a calendar and such. It just wasn't a draw for my personality. My approach more organically fit what was later deemed the intuitive approach, which is now supposedly for those who have enough experience to create their own microdosing schedules based on prior results. I just sort of stumbled into experimenting with smaller doses when having a full-blown macrodose experience wasn't feasible. A lot of the current information on scheduling and whatnot came into popularity after my journey had already begun and my intuition had already taken over. If you're brand new to microdosing, it can be easy to get hooked on the new and invigorating sparkle that these tiny doses of psilocybin can provide. It can be easy to go immediately overboard trying to address whatever it is that you're aiming at with your intention of microdosing. I know this happened to me when I first discovered using smaller doses. Now that these protocols are out there, though, if you are just beginning your journey, you may want to consider trying one of the pacing schedules listed, at least until you know how microdosing affects you over time, and your intuition can be guided by more than initial excitement. Just be aware of how you're feeling if you start to do it frequently, and if the effects aren't quite the same on some of the later doses as they were on the earlier doses, you might need to slow down and be mindful of your consumption. Psychedelics aren't like caffeine, where you can keep upping the dose once you build a tolerance and receive roughly the same effect. They seem to have a mind of their own, to some degree, one that dictates what kind of reaction you'll have. If they, whatever spirit you ingest by opening these chemical gateways, decide you're abusing the gift, they'll down-regulate the effects, even make it unpleasurable. That's been my experience anyway, as well as others I've read about or talked to. Nothing against Paul Stamets or anyone who finds his protocol beneficial, but his method of a 2-to-1 on-to-off ratio seems a bit aggressive from my own experimentation. It's a rare occasion that I dose twice in a row because of what I described above, and I would never see myself dosing 4 days in a row. His is also the only protocol that goes without at least 1 day off in between doses. Not to mention, laundry might get tedious pissing your sheets 4 nights a week. The every other day protocol and 1-to-1 ratio are more conservative, although with the second day phenomenon, the unanticipated discovery of an afterglow effect that is now reflected in many microdosing studies, this is something of a degree of always on. The Fadiman method is the most conservative, allowing for 1 completely sober day of returning to baseline in the 1-to-2 ratio. My thoughts on these protocols are that schedules are nice and all, but gee, for people who believe in neuroplasticity, they sure do seem rigid in their ways. Kidding. Sort of. I like to use each microdose as an appropriate tool for certain days, but life doesn't unfold on a 3-day cycle, or 4 days in a row and not for 3 days. Life comes at you randomly, and you have to be fluid and adapt. The intuitive approach is less of a protocol and more of a lifestyle. Similar to the notion out there that you should only take psychedelics when you're in a good mood, why? Why are we abiding by these rules? If I wake up one day in a good headspace with a lot of energy, I want to enjoy that natural state of being. I don't want to roll the dice and risk a down-regulating energetic effect or stir up some emotions that wouldn't have otherwise arisen. I also don't want to get into the habit of thinking, my mood is pretty good today, but maybe I could take some drugs and make it even better. I want to encourage as many natural good days as possible. On the flip side, if I find myself caught in a bad mood, that's when I want to take a microdose and try to turn that negative headspace around. I utilize microdosing strategically, with a purpose, on days that call for it. Not every 3rd day because the calendar says so. If I wake up in a great mood 4 days in a row, I'm gonna ride out that natural high. Then, if I'm a crotchety old grump or have zero motivation on that 5th day, that's the day I might need a little help turning the ship around. If I recognize myself in an unhealthy negative thought loop I can't escape from, I don't want to reinforce that downward spiral. I want to pattern interrupt with psychedelic intervention and get my mind back into the grooves I'm trying to ingrain deeper. There's an overused but great metaphor in the psychedelic community, comparing your brain to a ski slope in a snow globe. Taking psychedelics is compared to shaking up the snow globe so that you can erase old grooves and create new ones in fresh powder. When your sober mind is operating fine and you're gliding down the grooves you want to be, abstain from microdosing. Deepen those grooves. But when you hit a bad groove off the ideal path, shake up the globe with a microdose so you can pop out of it and get back into the good grooves. That's the proper use of microdosing, at least in the mental health capacity, at least in my opinion. I can also promise you there won't be a time when I'm having a crappy day and tell myself, I wish I could microdose today, but it's my scheduled off day. Boo. Nope, popping that thing if I need to so I don't dig the bad grooves deeper, even if it's 2 days in a row. Look, I get it. People wanting strict schedules, logging everything and such, and I can hear the nerds in lab coats now. But how can you track progress? What will you analyze? How do you know if it's working? Well, I guess the FDA won't be knocking at my door to lead a study anytime soon. Not that I couldn't write one that at least concludes women have periods and men don't. This is just what works for me. I encourage you to find what works for you, but don't feel boxed in by any protocol if that doesn't jive with your lifestyle. One last advantage of the intuitive approach I'll point out is that you cater your microdosing schedule to you as opposed to working around your schedule. What I mean is that maybe day 3 on your calendar isn't the preferred day to microdose. Maybe you'd rather feel that psilocybin sparkle on a day that isn't dictated by a schedule. You're going paddleboarding on Saturday, for example, and you don't want to say, shucks, my calendar says that's an off day because I'm scheduled to microdose on Thursday. Or maybe a spur-of-the-moment, microdose-worthy social event pops up. You don't want to be at the mercy of some schedule just for maintaining a schedule's sake. And on the flip side, if there aren't any microdose-worthy events on your calendar right now, and your mental health and moods are stable, consider abstaining from microdosing so that your nervous system stays fresh and your tolerance stays low. Improvisation, intuition. These should be the guiding forces of your microdosing lifestyle. Or at least, that's what I've found has been the best protocol for me. Why not every day? There is ample anecdotal evidence to suggest that microdosing psychedelics loses effectiveness when taken consecutively over time. The protocols outlined above were created by collecting the feedback of thousands of microdosers, and each concluded that days off are necessary. There seem to be few examples, if any, that daily microdosing for extended periods adds benefit. Daily dosing might also be counterproductive due to the potential for building a tolerance. In addition, off days are a time to reflect upon how you feel without the microdose in your system, compared to on days. Do you feel different? How so? Is there an afterglow effect? Are you noticing lasting changes while sober? These are the kinds of questions you may want to be asking yourself during these times. Taking breaks. Because there isn't any research on the long-term effects of consistent microdosing over time, all of the above protocols take a conservative approach by suggesting time off after microdosing for set periods. Each recommends a rough outline of 4 to 8 weeks on, followed by 2 to 4 weeks off. This idea was influenced by survey respondents from around the globe who independently decided taking time off was a healthy idea, one that adds to the safety profile of microdosing and helps you reflect on and recognize what has worked. Now, while psilocybin mushrooms don't have addictive properties or any known physical consequences in healthy populations, if you find yourself depending on any substance for extended periods, taking conscious breaks is a good idea to prevent dependency and allow your body to return to baseline. Personally, I just listen to my body. I'm also pretty inconsistent in general, sometimes going extended periods without it. A week or 2 might go by before I think, oh yeah, microdosing. Or, for example, not too long ago, I went a year without consuming any psychedelics at all. My breaks just naturally arise, rather than being scheduled. Use comes in waves, as does life. It's erratic, I know, but it's worked for me. I'll also point out that I put less exogenous stress on my brain in general, so when I do go through stretches of frequent use, I'm less concerned about taking breaks. I don't drink or smoke, take caffeine or pharmaceuticals, and I eat, sleep, and exercise well. My brain remains at sober baseline other than periodic psychedelic use, with everything necessary in place to recover. Maybe you don't drink, but you take caffeine every day and eat well. Maybe your neighbor drinks and smokes every day and their diet consists mostly of Adderall. Should all three of us be prescribed the same protocol for using and abstaining from microdosing? Nobody knows. There's not enough scientific research. But surely these factors influence your body's genetic ability to process and recover from a stint of microdosing, if there's even any room for concern at all. And if your neighbor is overworking their central nervous system while drinking their liver to death, I would guess that microdosing regularly, which would probably encourage them to adopt healthier habits anyway, should probably be the least of their worries. What I'm getting at is that, as of now, these protocols of use and rest are just guesswork. They've been around for a few years without a scientific basis. Nothing against them. They're a good place to start if you prefer structure, but feeling out what works best for you by listening to your body, intuition, and the mushrooms themselves is equally as reasonable as following the path of trailblazers. If you decide on the intuitive approach, there are some general adages floating around, such as not too much, not too often, and not too long without a break. This is good starting advice if you venture out into the unknown on your own. That said, scientific research might come out tomorrow and suggest that what I'm telling you is completely wrong. And oh, by the way, women have periods and men don't. But right now, we just don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out that taking a microdose before bed and pissing on your floor every night increases empathy in relationships and lowers the divorce rate. But until we have that data, if you feel that your girlfriend putting up with your nocturnal adventures 4 nights a week is adding strain to your relationship, I'd trust your intuition instead of sailing forth into those surly waters just because Stamets says so. For all we know, avoiding breaks could be the first step in our evolution toward becoming those slender, big-headed aliens seen flying around in saucers. Or perhaps microdosing every day of your life could have such negative consequences that you'll devolve into an ape-like humanoid. My guess is that it's somewhere in between. But at this stage of the game, microdosers are pioneers. If you choose to be one of them, just keep breaks in mind. If you do take a break, when do you start up again? Well, a number of years ago, I hit a wall pretty hard with frequent psychedelic experimentation. As I've expressed, my feeling is that there is some kind of spirit encountered when consuming psilocybin mushrooms. At the end of one trip, this spirit essentially broke up with me. After that, I didn't feel called to resume our relationship for at least another year. What I'm getting at is that I felt called to resume my use of psychedelics. Make of that what you will, if you have no psychedelic experience, but ask anyone who has a long-standing relationship with any of these substances, at least the natural ones like mushrooms, and I'd be willing to bet they've come across this phenomenon to some degree. It's just some kind of gut feeling you get that says, I think I need to trip soon, or I think today is the day to microdose. Listen for it, and you'll sense it. After a macrodose? I've seen 2 schools of thought on microdosing during the time around a macrodose. One is that microdosing in the week or 2 leading up to a macrodose might lower the effectiveness of the macrodose experience, and therefore it is recommended that you abstain from microdosing during that time. Likewise, this same school seems to think users might not find value in returning to microdosing from several days to a few weeks after a microdose. The other school of thought is that microdosing in the weeks after a larger journey can help you to reattune to the frequency of insight and support reflection about what was revealed, watering the seeds of what was planted, so to speak. While breastfeeding. As you can imagine, for potential ethical reasons, there aren't a lot of scientific human trials on microdosing while breastfeeding that prove whether or not there are consequences. As of today, the implications of long-term use in adults who microdose are unclear, let alone for developing infants. That said, there are women out there who have done so and other women who are curious about doing so. The Microdosing Institute's article titled Microdosing While Breastfeeding, How Safe Is It? States that the number one reason why some moms may consider microdosing magic mushrooms or another substance occasionally while breastfeeding is for mental health support post-pregnancy. They intuitively know that taking responsibility for their mental health is now more important than ever. Most women keep the best interest of their baby in mind and ask themselves the honest question whether their child might be worse off if they transmit anxiety, stress, irritability, or depression, either energetically or through breast milk, to their newborn. If you turn to a Reddit r/microdosing search of breastfeeding for insight, there are once again strong opinions from both sides. As the opposing views are similar to the pregnancy comments shared earlier, in other words, insults, criticism, assumptions, here I'll just share the expressed motivations of why mothers are considering microdosing. The following are pulled from threads such as microdosing and breastfeeding, breastfeeding mamas and MD, and microdosing while pregnant or breastfeeding. I'm trying to weigh up here the benefits of continuing to feed my baby versus potential harm that could be caused by either minute amounts of psilocybin passing versus the potential benefit to her emotional well-being of having a more present/less anxious mother. I'm considering starting microdosing as self-treatment for long-term anxiety issues. I could just stop feeding her soon anyway, but if that's not necessary, then I would prefer to carry on. I think she would too. There is very limited research on the drugs my doctors prescribed during my pregnancy and postpartum. I have therapists that are much more relaxed about the idea of microdosing than folks here. I know. You may be just concerned for the baby and lack of info, but please don't forget about us. Your sisters, daughters, partners, best friends, mothers. We are important too. Our mental health is important to do this role of motherhood. We are too often trying to choose between quitting breastfeeding altogether, negative for baby, just having a little drink and hoping it's out of the milk by the time we feed, or just trusting pharmaceutical meds simply because you won't get as much shit for it. I just ask you to be considerate, thoughtful, and maybe just silent if you really don't understand a mother's position. I honestly feel microdosing will be the best, safest, effective thing for me and my baby boy going forward. I'm absolutely not advocating for or stating I believe it to be safe to microdose while breastfeeding. But I personally do know 2 women who took mushrooms, including microdoses, while pregnant and while breastfeeding. Both of those kids are awesome and smart, but the older of those children is 7 now and is quite possibly the smartest, most positive child I've ever met. I say this having 3 of my own children who are also smart and positive, LOL, but that kid's just on another level. I wish there was more research done into mushrooms in general, microdosing, what's safe for the babies. There is so much potential in these mushrooms, but there is no money in it versus pharma, so studies are not done. My ex-wife struggled with depression during the pregnancy of our first and second children together. Much like yourself, the doctor prescribed a few pharmaceutical medicines to make her feel better. I can absolutely 100% assure you without a shadow of a doubt that the only thing she felt was numbness. When both of my eldest children were born, 2 years apart, they had withdrawal from the medication. Withdrawal! They were sick because their bodies needed the medication my ex-wife was on. It took them months to shake it properly. Why is it taboo to even think that psychedelic mushrooms, a natural product, and if you believe in the stoned ape theory, the reason we're even able to debate this point, are bad for you and your baby, but pharmaceutical medicine is accepted as normal by most doctors who prescribe these things like fun pills? In the aforementioned survey of 411 women who had already used psilocybin before, during, or after pregnancy, 237 responded saying they did so while breastfeeding. They frequently cited reduced anxiety or stress and improved emotional resilience or connectedness as key benefits. Many of the children are now over the age of 5, with no fatalities or abnormalities reported. That said, I might just remind readers about the likely bias of the audience polled, as well as the reasonable degree of unlikelihood for anyone who saw negative consequences to report them. Looking toward indigenous cultures for insight, taking small doses of ayahuasca in ceremony while breastfeeding is common in groups like the Shipobo Conibo of the Peruvian Amazon, as mentioned in the pregnancy section of Who. They believed it supports both the mother and the baby to be even more aligned with one another and with spirit, and believe that these practices have a stimulating effect on the cognitive abilities of the baby. In a speech from the 2017 Psychedelic Science Conference hosted by MAPS, author of a number of books on peyote, Stacy Schaefer, Ph.D., points out that breastfeeding while ingesting peyote has been a practice for the Wiharika, Huichol, people for thousands of years. We would not recommend it, she says, based on the lack of scientific evidence for its safety. But it must not be maladaptive, otherwise it would not have withstood over time. Psychiatric nurse practitioner C.J. Spotswood wrote in his book, The Microdosing Guidebook, a step-by-step manual to improve your physical and mental health through psychedelic medicine, psilocin and psilocybin are eliminated through the kidneys, most of which occurs within the first 3 hours after oral ingestion, and completely within 24 hours. Hasler et al., 2002. Due to the dosage being a microdose, James Fadiman asserts that if individuals wait at least 6 hours between microdosing and breastfeeding, there shouldn't be any concerns. Morsky, 2021. Additionally, there is no evidence that either substance is eliminated through breast milk. Again, please talk with your medical provider about this. I am not saying it is 100% safe, but there is no research that supports or disproves safety concerns. Based on this information, the Microdosing Institute writes the following. If a mother decides she needs to experiment with microdosing at this time due to her own health needs, then a suggestion could be 1. Only use small doses, 100 milligrams / 0.1 grams of psilocybin or less. 2. Follow the Fadiman protocol of 1 day on, 2 days off, or even less frequently, such as microdosing 2 times per week. 3. On non-microdosing days, pump milk enough to last 24 to 36 hours to utilize during microdosing days. 4. For 24 hours after microdosing, pump and discard any milk produced during this period. In our global community, some women have opted to microdose following this suggestion and have found that it helped them manage their depressive symptoms, which would have also impacted the well-being of their babies/families. In physiology, all the body's systems are connected, and the question science needs to look at is how irregular and regular microdosing might impact the child's brain, hormone, and immune systems. Do I have an opinion on this, you ask? Well, you kinda just asked me that back in the pregnancy section, and my answer doesn't differ much here. I'm not a breastfeeding scientist, nor does there appear to be enough data to have a truly informed opinion. I'll remind you that there are more conservative ways of dealing with some of the difficulties that arise during or after pregnancy, like meditation, yoga, breathwork, exercise, talk therapy, herbal remedies, listening to relaxing music, or the like, that can be exhausted before any chemical interventions are considered, if one wanted to lower the risk-benefit ratio. But that's as far of an opinion as I'm willing to form for now. In conjunction with SSRIs. I touched upon SSRIs briefly under Why, but just wanted to add a little more context here. The primary mechanism of action for SSRIs is achieved through blocking the reuptake of serotonin in the brain, which ideally results in an uplifting mood, decreased anxiety, or improved stress tolerance. One side effect of increasing free serotonin in the brain is a possible decrease in the number of serotonin receptors. Therefore, when considering taking a serotonergic psychedelic substance, such as psilocybin, there may be fewer serotonin receptors for the compounds to attach to. It's not completely clear how this affects microdosing, but the general belief seems to be that the psychedelic effects could be dulled. A 2021 study administered the SSRI escitalopram in 23 healthy patients for 2 weeks leading up to and including the day of a macrodose of psilocybin. Outcomes based on self-rating scales found that daily escitalopram treatment for 2 weeks did not reduce the positive mood or mind-altering effects of a full dose of psilocybin in healthy subjects. Additionally, escitalopram pretreatment reduced untoward acute effects of psilocybin, including subjective bad drug effects, anxious ego dissolution, anxiety, and nadir effects, compared with placebo pretreatment. The authors concluded that the effects of escitalopram on the acute response to psilocybin in the present study could be considered positive with no evidence of increased toxicity, indicating that stopping escitalopram treatment before psilocybin administration may not be warranted. I, however, am pretty skeptical about drawing similar conclusions from this study for a few reasons. First, because the SSRI treatment was only 14 days long in healthy individuals, which I imagine is too short to produce the kinds of chronic neuroadaptations and changes in the number of serotonin receptors that could alter the effects of psilocybin as speculated above. Second, healthy individuals who don't typically take SSRIs are unlikely to be the real-world use case for the population we're talking about in most cases. Third, while it's easy to say that taking SSRIs before a psilocybin experience blunts the bad drug effects, therefore good, you might also be missing out on what the mushrooms are trying to show you. I've had many anxious or fearful psilocybin experiences where, in the moment, anyone could have labeled them a bad trip, but by the end, there was always a purpose in going through these rough patches. Personal growth comes out of working through difficult psychedelic scenarios. Sure, maybe you can numb yourself from these bad experiences, but why? That's half the point of taking psychedelics to begin with, to dig down and get to the crux of what's holding you back in life. To me, this idea is kind of like going to a scary movie that's had all of the scary parts cropped out. What's the point? That's the reason you're going in the first place. If you're just into the idea of a blissful visual experience, consider popping the SSRIs and going to a happy little 3D matinee. Just my 2 cents. Anyway, more recent research examined 611 online reports of taking mushrooms with an antidepressant and 1,542 reports of taking mushrooms following SSRI/SNRI discontinuation, and concluded that SSRI/SNRIs appear to weaken psilocybin drug effects relative to a non-serotonergic antidepressant. This dampening effect may last as long as 3 months following antidepressant discontinuation. Another study conducted a systematic search of Reddit for posts describing psilocybin mushroom and SSRI co-administration and applied a qualitative content analysis to 443 eligible posts. They found that 54% of posts described reduced intensity of the acute psilocybin experience, 39% reported unchanged intensity with SSRI co-administration, and 8% of posts reported negative physical or psychological effects, including 13 reports that may reflect serotonin toxicity and one concerning for a psychotic/manic episode. They concluded that psilocybin's interactions with SSRIs are likely complex and may depend on multiple factors. Prospective studies are needed to evaluate whether psilocybin treatments are reliably safe and effective in the setting of SSRI use. All of these studies report some kind of blunting effects, even if it was just the bad effects in healthy populations. But the majority of the more real-world use cases seem to agree that SSRIs weaken the effects of psilocybin, and one questioned the reliable safety of the combination. In light of this evidence, if you've suddenly arrived at the notion you may need to wean off your medication in order to capitalize on the full effects of microdosing, let me just remind you that I'm not a doctor, and none of this is medical advice. Improperly getting off of any medication can have potentially dire consequences, and any healthcare decisions should be made in concert with the physician who is prescribing your medication. Closing remarks. Phew, you made it. Hope I didn't overwhelm you with all the numbers and references there. I know I said quick, so I tried to make it concise, but also research-backed. Look, the scientific jury might still be out on whether or not microdosing inspires change through psychedelic intervention or placebo, but obviously, something is fueling all of the evidence we examined. Clinical research is one way to validate an accumulation of data, but a lack thereof doesn't mean what's observed is untrue. That said, while the number of benefits of microdosing seems huge and not entirely limited to what's described in this book, you're not guaranteed to experience all or even any of those benefits. Microdosing, and psychedelics in general, provides a very unique experience for all of us. It may not be a panacea for all illnesses and conditions, but since many people are experiencing an array of positive effects, it certainly seems to be a generally safe and worthwhile endeavor if you're interested, whatever your motivation may be. We may still be exploring a map of uncharted territory, relying heavily on the reports of those who have gone before us, but at least you, my friend, should now be equipped with everything you need to become a pioneer. If you choose to do so, follow the guidance laid out in this book, and you should have a good, or at least not bad, experience. And if you need anything, I have ways to find me listed on my Amazon page, which may or may not bring you to a review page for this book. This has been a quick what, who, why, where, how, and when of microdosing magic mushrooms by Kyle Woodruff. Read for you by Dallin Bradford.